The cub had its jaws around the sleeve of a dying man's arm, and it would not let go. And every enforcement officer in the wrecked docking bay had been told, in the same flat pulse over the same channel, that this was dangerous behavior and it would be corrected. Warden Cyril Osk came through the buckled hatch with her stun lance low and her carapace still ringing from the decompression alarms, and the first thing she understood was that the briefing had been wrong. She had been sent to contain a feral apex loose on the concourse. What she found instead was a creature the size of a hound standing over a downed human, slate-gray and streaked with frostburn, its amber eyes swinging to meet hers the instant her weight crossed the threshold. It did not lunge. It did not flee. It set its four forelimbs wide over the man's body, dropped its head, and made a sound so low that Cyril felt it in the plates of her chest before she heard it. "Hold the line," she told the two officers behind her. They were young. They had their lances up and their scent-blind eyes wide, and they wanted very badly to fire. The man on the deck was not moving. He wore the rust-orange coveralls of a relief corps rigger, grade 2 by the band on his shoulder, and he was young, human young, which the Aussie found difficult to read but which Cyril had learned to gauge by the smoothness of the skin and the softness of the hands. 20 of their years, perhaps. 22. His face was turned to the side against the deck plating, one cheek pressed to the cold, and a thin dark line ran from the corner of his mouth. His chest rose. It rose badly, in a shallow hitch that stopped a fraction too soon, but it rose. He was alive, and the beast was standing on the exact spot where a medic would need to kneel. "Warden," said the officer on her left, Junior Enforcement Danu, 6 months out of the cast hall. "Protocol 9, it's guarding a kill. We put it down before it finishes." "It hasn't finished," Cyril said. "It's had time. Look at the human's arm." They looked. The cub's jaws were closed around the loose fabric of the man's sleeve, above the wrist, and the fabric was not even torn. 200 kilos of frost country predator with a bite that could crack a bulkhead strut, and it was holding a scrap of coverall the way a mother of any species carried something it did not want to break. "It's playing with him," Danu said. "No," Cyril said. She had been 40 years in the containment caste. She had seen a great many things kill a great many other things, and she had never once seen a kill look like this. But she did not have a word for what it did look like, and in the containment caste a thing without a word was a thing without a protocol, and a thing without a protocol got the lance. "Danu, what does the manifest say came off the Karsus convoy?" Danu checked his slate with his lance still trained. "Rescue fauna, preserve stock out of the Thren dieback. 16 adult apex, 40 juveniles, sealed transport." His mandibles clicked. "The transport breached on final approach. That's the decompression we felt. Everything in Bay 9 is dead or loose. And this one's loose. This one's loose." Cyril took one slow step into the bay. The cub's growl climbed. Not toward her, she marked this, filed it, could not yet use it. The growl did not climb evenly across the room. It rose when she moved toward the man's head, and it eased when she drifted toward his feet, and it did not react to her at all so much as it reacted to a line, an invisible line drawn on the deck between the human skull and the far hatch, and anything that crossed that line got the full weight of the sound. "Warm the sedative rig," she said. "We take the animal alive if the law allows it." "Warden, the prefect's order." I heard the prefect's order, she had. Prefect Havin's voice had come over the channel before she was halfway to the bay, clipped and certain. "The animal has bonded to a corpse and become a hazard to station personnel. Terminate on contact. Do not attempt recovery." The prefect had said corpse. Cyril was looking at a man who was breathing. "Warm the rig, Danu." The bay was a ruin. The convoy transport had come in heavy. She could see that even now, in the way the docking clamps had sheared, in the way the mass had carried through the seals and folded a cargo gantry like foil. Frost hung in the air where the breach had dumped the transport's cold hold into the station's warmth, and it drifted down over everything in a fine gray fall, over the shattered containment pods, over the long dark shapes that had been apex predators and were now simply weight, over the young man on the deck and the cub that would not leave him. The emergency loom strips had kicked to amber. Everything in the bay was the color of a banked fire. Cyril crouched, slow, keeping her lance across her knees where the cub could see it was pointed at the floor. This close she could hear the man breathe, and the breath was wrong in a way that pulled at some old instinct under her plating. A wet catch at the bottom of it, a sound like a boot lifting out of mud. "Rigger," she said. The translator in her throat rendered it into the human trade tongue, flat and toneless. "Rigger, can you hear me?" The man's eyes did not open, but his hand, the hand at the end of the arm the cub was holding, moved. 2 fingers lifted off the deck, curled, and came to rest against the cub's foreleg. A small motion, the kind of motion a body makes without asking permission from the mind that owns it. And the cub, at the touch, shivered along its whole spine and dropped its head lower and pressed the side of its jaw to the top of the man's head. And its growl did not stop, but it changed, thinned, became something that was still a warning to the room and had stopped being a warning to him. Danu made a sound behind her. "It's quiet," Cyril said. She had come here to end an animal. She stayed crouched a moment longer than protocol allowed, and she watched a dying human calm a frost country apex with 2 fingers. And for the first time in a long career, she felt the shape of a question she did not know how to ask. Then the far hatch cycled, and the prefect came in, and the question had to wait. Prefect having arrived the way weather arrives. 3 station guards ahead, 2 behind, all of them the tall, pale-plated enforcement build, all of them armed for a creature that had so far bitten nothing but a sleeve. Having himself was old for an Asu, his carapace gone the yellow of aged bone, his eyes filmed at the edges. He wore the containment prefecture's gray overmantle, and he carried, folded under one arm, a slate that Cyril would later spend a great deal of time thinking about. Warden Osk. He did not look at the human. Cyril noticed this too and filed it and did not yet know what it meant. "I gave a termination order." "You gave it for a corpse, prefect." Cyril rose. "The human is alive." Something moved behind the film of Haven's eyes. "The human is a casualty of the breach. He will not survive it. The animal is a hazard to the recovery teams and to this station, and every minute it stands there is a minute my personnel are exposed to it." He lifted 2 fingers, and the guard nearest him unslung a heavy sedative caster, the kind used on adult stock, the kind that put a 2-ton war beast on the floor for a day. "Clear a firing lane, warden. Step your officers back. If you sedate the animal in that position, it will collapse on the human's chest." Cyril kept her voice level. "He is having trouble breathing as it is. The weight will finish him." "He is finished regardless." Having's translator did not soften it. "Step back." And here was the thing Cyril could not have explained to the caste board afterward, the thing that was not in any protocol and would have to be defended without one. She did not step back. She stood between the sedative caster and the cub, and she said, "No, prefect. Not until the medic has looked at the man." The bay went very still. Frost fell. The cub, which had been watching the prefect with a fixed and terrible attention since the moment he entered, made a new sound, not the low warning it had used on the officers, but something higher and harder, a note with an edge on it, and it took 1 step forward off the man's body, 1 single step toward Having, and every guard in the room brought a weapon up. "See," Having said softly, "it is aggressive. It targets personnel." But Cyril was watching the cub, and the cub had not targeted personnel. It had not swung toward Danu, who was closest. It had not swung toward the 2 guards flanking the hatch. It had taken 1 step, and the step was aimed like a lance, and the point of the lance was the prefect and nothing but the prefect. And when having shifted his weight, the cub shifted with him, tracking, holding the line, the way a compass holds north. "Medic," Cyril said not loudly into her collar. "Bay 9 now." The medic who came was not As. She was Vayu, small and quick and soft-shelled, a member of the medical caste that the enforcement castes tolerated and quietly depended on. And her name was Ilo, and she had a scanner already lit in her hand when she ducked through the hatch and stopped dead at the sight of the animal. "I can't work with that thing standing on my patient," Ilo said. "Then work around it," Cyril said. "Scan from where you are, tell me if the human is dying." Ilo lifted the scanner. The cub's head snapped toward her, and its growl swelled, and Ilo flinched. And then the man on the deck, without opening his eyes, said one word. "Gray." It was barely a word. It was a breath with a shape to it. But the cub heard it, and the growl cut off as if a wire had been pulled, and the animal turned its huge head back to the man and pressed its nose to his temple and went still. And in the stillness, Ilo got her scan. Cyril watched the Vayu medic's face. She had learned to read the soft-shelled species better than her own. Their fear lived close to the surface. And she watched Ilo's scanner return its answer, and she watched Ilo read it, and she watched every quick nervous line of the medic's body go slack with something that was not relief. "Warden," Ilo said, her voice had dropped. "Warden, this man has a hemothorax left side. His chest is filling with blood." She looked up and her eyes went to the cub and stayed there. Blunt force, a crush injury. The lungs collapsing against the fluid. "Then we treat it," Cyril said. "We can't treat it here, we have to move him, but—" Ilo stopped. She looked at the cub again. She looked at how it stood. She looked at the angle of the man's head, tilted back and to the side, chin lifted off the chest, the airway held open by the exact geometry of a slate-gray skull pressed under his jaw. She looked at how the man lay, not flat, not crumpled, but propped, the injured side down, the good lung up, the whole weight of him arranged along a line that a battlefield medic would have taken 30 seconds and 2 hands to build. "Move him how?" Cyril said. "On his back," Ilo said slowly. "Standard, flat, immobilized, that's the protocol for a spinal risk casualty. Flat on his back. And if you move him flat on his back." Ilo was quiet for a moment. "With that much blood in the left chest," she said, "flat on his back the fluid shifts. It compresses the good lung and the great vessels. He drowns from the inside in under a minute." She looked at the cub, at the tilted head, at the injured side laid carefully down. "Whatever's holding him," she said, "is holding him in the only position that's kept him alive." Cyril turned. The prefect had not moved, but the sedative caster had, drifting up by a degree in the guard's grip, and Havin's filmed eyes were on the medic now, and there was something in the set of his mandibles that Cyril did not like at all. "Prefect," she said, "you will not fire on that animal." "Warden ask." "You will not fire on that animal," Cyril said again, and this time she brought her own lance up, not toward the cub, and the 2 young officers behind her made a sound of pure astonishment. "Because that animal is the only thing on this station currently keeping a citizen of the Relief Corps alive, and if it dies, he dies, and I will not sign that." For a long moment nobody moved. Frost fell through the amber light. The cub stood over the young man with its head under his jaw and its amber eyes fixed on the prefect, holding the line, and the young man breathed his wet and hitching breath, and somewhere far off in the ruined station an alarm was still counting the dead. "It targets me," Havin said at last, very quietly, almost to himself. "Do you see how it targets me?" "I see it," Cyril said. She did not yet understand what she was seeing, but she had been 40 years in the containment caste, and she had learned that when an animal draws a line on the floor and dares the whole armed room to cross it, the animal has a reason, and the reason is almost never the one written in the briefing. She looked at the cub. She looked at the young man it would not leave. She looked at the prefect it would not stop watching, and at the slate folded under the prefect's arm, and she made the second decision that would cost her, later, a great deal. "Denu," she said, "log everything from the moment I entered this bay, full sensory. Seal it to my authority." "Warden," the prefect outranks. "Seal it to my authority," Cyril said, and if anyone but me tries to open it, I want to know their name. Cole Merrick did not know where he was, but he knew he was cold, and he knew the warm thing was still there, and as long as the warm thing was there he was not going to die, so he held on. That was as much as the mind under the blood could manage. It came in pieces, the way things come when the body has decided to spend its remaining fuel on the heart and the lungs and nothing else. He knew the deck was cold under his cheek. He knew there was a weight along his back and a heat under his jaw and a heartbeat that was not his own, slower than his, steadier, thudding against his skull like a hand knocking on a far door. He knew that when he tried to breathe deep the world went white at the edges, so he had stopped trying to breathe deep. He took the breaths the warm thing seemed to want him to take, small ones, high ones, and the warm thing breathed with him, and between them they kept the machine running. There were voices, alien voices run through translators coming to him from the top of a well. Words swam up: corpse, terminate, hazard. He wanted to tell them he was not a corpse. He wanted to tell them not to touch the warm thing. He got as far as moving 2 fingers and the warm thing shivered, and he felt rather than heard the growl start up again over his head, and he thought with the small clear part of his mind that the blood had not yet reached. Good. Good. You tell them Gray. He had named it Gray 4 hours ago, in the hold, before everything came apart. He hadn't meant to be in the hold at all. Cole was atmospherics. He ran the scrubbers and the heat exchange on the relief tenders. He was the kid they sent crawling into the ducts because he was small and didn't mind the dark, and he had exactly no business anywhere near the live cargo. But the Carsus convoy had come in 3 days ahead of schedule and short-crewed. 16 adult apex, and a nursery of juveniles pulled off a dying preserve on a world nobody would name, because naming it meant admitting they'd let it die. And the transport's cold hold heat exchange had been throwing faults the whole way in, and the only atmospherics tech on the relief side who could fit through the maintenance crawl to reach the exchanger was Cole. So they sent him into a cold hold full of frost country predators with a hand light and a torque driver, and a promise that the pods were sealed. The pods were sealed. The exchanger was not the problem. The problem was that the transport was carrying half again the mass it was rated for, and Cole knew that because he'd read the manifest against the exchanger load while he worked, the way you do, and the numbers hadn't matched, and he'd flagged it on the core channel. Bay 9 cargo mass exceeds transport rating. Recommend hold on docking pending review, and someone with a prefecture seal had closed the flag inside of 90 seconds. Cole remembered being annoyed about that. He remembered thinking, in the crawlway, that somebody was going to get somebody killed being in a hurry. Then he'd come out of the crawl into the main hold to reset the exchanger, and he'd seen the nursery pod. It was a big pen at the aft end, transparent on one face, and behind the transparency there had been a grown dreve, a female. He'd know that later, though in the moment she was just an enormous slate-gray shape with a white blaze down her chest, and pressed against her flank a knot of cubs, and one cub, the smallest, standing at the front of the pen with its nose against the transparency, watching him. Just watching him. Amber eyes in the dark. Cole had done a foolish thing then, the kind of thing that gets riggers written up. He'd crouched down on the far side of the transparency and looked back at it, and he'd said, because you say something, hey, you. Cold in there, huh? And the cub had put one forepaw up against the transparency, and Cole had put his glove up against it from the other side, and for a moment there had been a rigger and a monster's child with a wall of frustrated glass between them and nothing else, and Cole had said, "You're a gray little thing, aren't you?" And that was the name. Then the docking clamps had sheared. Cole didn't remember the breach's sound. He remembered it as a fist. The overloaded transport had come into the clamps too heavy and too fast. The seals had failed under mass they were never rated to hold, and the cold hold had opened to the station in a single tearing instant. The pressure differential had thrown Cole across the hold like a dropped tool. It had thrown the pods too. The seals had let go. The pens had ruptured. And in the roaring gray chaos of venting atmosphere and screaming metal, The last thing Cole had seen clearly was the nursery pen splitting open, and the grown female coming out of it with her cubs scattering under her. He'd hit a gantry strut with his left side. He'd felt something go deep, a wet crunch that didn't hurt yet because the body is kind for the first few seconds. He'd gone down between two fallen containers with the cold pouring over him and the station's warm air fighting it and frost condensing out of the war between them. And he'd known, in a distant professional way, that he was hurt badly and that he needed to not be here. And the female Dreve had come to him through the wreck. He hadn't understood it then, and he only half understood it now, down at the bottom of the blood well, but he had understood it enough to lie still. She was dying. He knew that the way you know things in a wreck. Something had gone into her when the pod ruptured, a strut or a shard, and she was bleeding out her side in a slick that steamed on the cold deck, and she had crossed 20 meters of chaos to stand over the rigger who had put his glove up against her child's paw. She had lowered her enormous head. She had looked at him with the same amber eyes, gone dull now at the edges. And then she had done a thing that Cole would spend the rest of his life trying to describe, and never quite managing. She had taken the smallest cub, the gray one, by the scruff, and she had set it down against Cole's chest, on his good side, and she had pressed her nose once to the top of Cole's head, the way, he'd learn later, a Dreve matriarch marks the one she is entrusting her line to. And then she had turned and put her body between the two of them and the rest of the collapsing hold, and she had died there, standing, a wall of slate-gray muscle holding back the wreck. And she had not fallen until she was sure the falling would not land on them. Cole had lain under the cub with the dead weight of its mother 3 feet away and the cold coming down like snow, and the cub had climbed up his chest and put its head under his jaw, and something in the way it settled had made his breathing easier, and he had thought, stay, don't let them. And then the blood had come up his throat and the well had opened under him, and he had been falling ever since. Now there were voices again, the soft one, the medic, close by his head, and the flat, cold one, the one that had said corpse. Moving away, he could feel the cub track it, feel the growl follow it to the hatch, feel the whole slate-gray body tense along his back as the cold voice retreated and then, unbearably, come back. Cannot leave the animal in place indefinitely, the cold voice was saying. You have a window, medic. Stabilize the human enough to move and move him, and I will have the animal dealt with the moment it is off the body. That is a lawful order, and it is a merciful one. Every hour that creature stands there it suffers, and the human suffers, and my station is held hostage to a beast's confusion. It's not confused, said the soft voice. The medic, Cole liked her voice. It was frightened and it kept going anyway. Prefect, with respect, I've been scanning it for 20 minutes. Its heart rate is elevated but stable. Its posture is deliberate. It is not confused. It knows exactly what it's doing, which is more than I can say for. She stopped herself. Cole, at the bottom of the well, smiled with the part of his face that still worked. Finish that sentence, medic, the cold voice said softly. I have a patient, said. I need to work. Footsteps, the cold voice withdrawing but not far. Cole felt the cub's growl ride it all the way to the wall and hold there, low, a hand pressed flat on a closed door. Then the other voice, the warden, the one who had said he is alive. Cole had decided he trusted that one on the strength of 2 words, the way you decide things when you're dying. She came down to his level. He felt the shift of a big plated body crouching near his feet, careful, staying out of the line. Rigger, she said, my name is Cyril Osk. I am the warden of record for this bay. Can you understand me? Cole moved his fingers. Good, Cyril said. Don't try to speak. The medic is going to put a drain in your chest to take the blood off your lung. It is going to hurt and you are going to want to move. You must not move. Whatever you do, do not let this animal think you are being harmed. A pause. Can you keep it calm while she works? Cole thought about that. He thought about Gray, the warm weight, the slow far heartbeat. He thought about the cold voice by the wall and the way the growl tracked it and only it. And with an enormous effort, spending fuel he could not spare, Cole Merrick turned his hand over and laid it flat against the cub's foreleg and pressed, once, the way you press a friend's shoulder to say it's all right. "I've got this." And he felt the cub go quiet under his hand, and he breathed out, small and high, and said the only word he had left. "Easy." He felt the medic's tool touch his side. He felt the warm thing shudder and hold. He felt the line drawn on the deck between his skull and the far hatch, the line the cub would not let anyone cross, and he understood, dimly, that as long as he could keep his hand on that foreleg, the line would hold and he would live. He kept his hand on the foreleg. Above him, though he could not see it, Warden Cyril Osk watched a dying human quiet an apex predator with a single word and a single touch, and watched the medic slide a drain between the young man's ribs, while the beast that could have killed her in a heartbeat instead pressed its nose to the boy's hair and shook. And she thought, carefully, because it was not a thought the containment caste had a protocol for, that in 40 years she had called a great many behaviors dangerous, and that she was no longer certain she had ever once understood what the word was supposed to mean. They could not move him. That was the finding that broke the prefect's clean plan, and Warden Cyril Osk watched it break over the course of the next 2 hours, and she made sure Danu logged every minute of it. Ilo got the drain in. Dark blood came off the boy's chest into a collection bulb, more than Cyril liked the look of, and the boy's breathing eased by a fraction, enough that the wet catch at the bottom of it loosened, enough that Ilo stopped flinching every time he inhaled. But the drain was not a cure. It was a finger in a leak. The crush had done something to the vessels along the boy's ribs that a field kit could not close, and the moment they laid him flat to carry him, Ilo said, the fluid would shift and the pressure would find his heart, and he would die between the bay and the infirmary as surely as if they'd left him on the deck. "So we bring the infirmary here," Cyril said. "You can't bring a surgical suite into a decompressed bay," Ilo said. "The field's not clean. He needs the table. Then we build the field around him. Screen the area. Get me a pressure tent and a power feed and whatever your caste needs, and we do the surgery on this deck in this position without moving him a hand's width." Ilo looked at her. "That's not protocol." "None of this is protocol," Cyril said. "Note that in the log as well." It should have been simple after that. It was not simple, because everything Cyril requisitioned had to come through the prefecture, and the prefecture was having had discovered a great many reasons why a surgical tent could not be spared, why the power feed was committed elsewhere, why the recovery of 40 dead apex from the ruined bays was a higher call on the caste's resources than one relief corps rigger who was, the prefect's aide kept repeating in that smooth prefecture cadence, unlikely to survive regardless. Cyril sat back on her heels and watched the delays stack up and understood that she was being told, without anyone saying it, to let the boy die on the clock. Nobody would give the termination order now. The medic's scan had made that too ugly to sign, but if the surgery simply never arrived, if the tent was always an hour away and the power always committed, then in time the boy would fail on his own, and the cub would rise off a body that had finally become the corpse the prefect had called it, and the lance would take it in a clean, lawful moment, and the log would show only that the caste had done everything it could. She had seen bureaucracy kill before. She had never seen it kill this slowly, with this much paper. "Danu," she said quietly, "the mass manifest for the Karsus convoy, the one the medic mentioned the boy flagged. I want the flag and I want the seal that closed it." Danu worked his slate. His mandibles went still in a way Cyril had learned to read. "Warden, the flag's there. Relief Corps channel filed by Rigger to Merrick C. 91 minutes before docking. Cargo mass exceeds transport rating. Recommend hold pending review." He looked up. It was closed 40 seconds later. Overridden. Docking cleared. "By whom?" Danu hesitated. "The seal's a prefecture seal, Warden. It's Havings." Cyril let that sit. Across the bay the prefect stood with his aides, not looking at her. his gray overmantle very clean in the amber light. And the cub tracked him the way it had tracked him since the moment he walked in, not the medic, not the guards, not Cyril, only him. And Cyril thought about a young rigger who had done his job and read a manifest and flagged a number that did not add up. And about a prefecture seal that had closed the flag inside a minute and sent an overloaded transport onto the clamps that killed it. And she thought about the cub, and the line it drew on the floor, and where the point of that line was aimed. "It targets me," Havin had said. "Do you see how it targets me?" "Denu," Cyril said. "Does a Dreve have a sense of smell?" Denu blinked at the turn. "A considerable one, Warden. The preserved species are scent hunters. Their olfactory range is," he checked. "The data burst says a Dreve can track a wounded animal across 40 kilometers of open ice by blood scent alone. It says their pups can distinguish individual pack members by scent from the day their eyes open." He lowered the slate. "Why?" Cyril did not answer, because the answer was still assembling itself, and because it was the kind of answer that would sound insane spoken aloud in a caste bay to a 6-month officer. But she had it now, or the shape of it. The os had no sense of smell at all. It was why they made such good containment officers and such poor investigators. They went by protocol and by log and by the clean evidence of the eye, and they could stand in a room reeking of a truth and never know it was there. But the cub was not os. The cub had been in that cold hold. The cub had smelled the pod rupture and the mass venting and its mother's blood on the deck, and before that, on the long approach, it had smelled the hold itself, the overloaded straining hold, and whatever a scent hunter smells when a transport is being driven past its limits by a decision made somewhere up the chain. And now the man who made that decision was standing in the bay, and the cub could smell him. It was not evidence, Cyril knew that. No caste board in the Reach would convict a prefect on the nose of an orphaned pup. But it moved something in her, a certainty older than protocol, and she had learned across 40 years to trust the certainty and then go find the log that proved it. Warden Osk, having crossed to her, unhurried, his aides trailing. He looked for the first time at the young man on the deck, and Cyril watched him do it, and watched the cub's whole body draw tight as a bowstring as the prefect's shadow fell across the boy. "This has become an embarrassment. I have a relief corps rigger dying on my dock under a preserve animal that will not be moved, and a warden of my own caste obstructing a lawful recovery. I am convening a containment review. In 1 hour this bay comes under prefecture control, the animal is dealt with under Protocol 9, and the human is transported by whatever means the medic can manage." He paused. "You may lodge your objection in the record. It will be noted." "It will," Cyril agreed, "in detail." Something flickered behind the old prefect's filmed eyes. Cyril had spent 40 years reading the small tells of frightened things, and she had just seen one on the face of a containment prefect, and it was not the fear of a man worried about his station. It was the narrower, colder fear of a man who has realized that a record is being kept. 1 hour, having said, and turned. And as he turned, the cub came up off the boy's body, not all the way. Its hindquarters stayed anchored over the young man's legs, but its forequarters rose and its head came level, and it showed, having, for the first time, the full white ladder of its teeth, and the sound it made was not a growl at all. It was a promise. Low, even, unhurried, the sound of something that has all the time in the world and has already chosen where it will spend it. Having stopped. He did not mean to, Cyril saw that. His body stopped before his pride could tell it not to, the way any body stops when a thing that can open it decides to look at it directly. For one long moment, the prefect of containment and a 6-month-old orphan held the whole ruined bay between them, and every armed guard in the room stood frozen with a lance half raised, and nobody breathed. "Easy," the young man said from the deck, eyes closed. His hand pressed the cub's foreleg. "Easy, Gray, not yet." "Not yet." Cyril heard it. She saw Denu hear it. She saw, though she could not have proven it, the prefect hear it, because Havin's mantle stirred as a shiver went through the old carapace under it, and then he walked out of the bay very quickly for a man who wished to appear unhurried, and his aides went after him, and the cub sank back down over the boy and put its head under his jaw and became, once more, the gentlest thing in the room. Ilo let out a long breath. "I have never," she said to no one, "seen anything decide to kill someone so politely." "It hasn't decided," Cyril said. "It's waiting. There's a difference, and the difference is the boy's hand." She looked at the young rigger, at the two fingers laid flat against the gray foreleg, the small pressure that said not yet. As long as he's conscious to say no, the animal holds. The moment he can't, she did not finish. She did not have to. Ilo's soft shell had gone pale at the edges. "Then we keep him conscious," the medic said, "and we keep him alive, and we do it here on this deck because that thing is right and the prefect is wrong, and I am so tired of being the only one in the room who can smell it." She stopped. "Figuratively, my caste can't smell either." "I know," Cyril said. And then, because she had made her decision somewhere in the last 2 hours and there was no profit in pretending otherwise. "Denu, I need 3 things, and I need them before the prefect's hour is up. I need a surgical tent, and I do not care whose authority I forge to get it. I need the full sensory record of the Karsus convoy's final approach, the transport's own logs, the docking telemetry, all of it, before the prefecture seals it. And I need to know where the rest of the animals went." Denu looked up sharply. "Warden." "The manifest said 16 adult apex came off that transport. The bay accounts for the female and account of the dead." Cyril rose and looked out through the buckled hatch, down the long amber throat of the ruined concourse, into the dark of a station that had lost pressure in 9 bays and had not yet found all of its own casualties. "It does not account for the others. A pod ruptured. A nursery scattered. Somewhere on this station, Denu, there is a pack of Frost Country apex loose in the dark, and every one of them can smell exactly what this cub smells." She turned back to the boy, and the cub, and the line drawn on the floor. "And they can smell their matriarch's blood on this deck, and they can smell the human she died marking, and sooner or later they are going to come looking for both." The surgical tent came in 11 minutes, and Cyril never did tell the caste board whose authority she had used to get it. It came on a grav sled pushed by 2 relief corps medics who had heard, the way crews always hear, that one of their own was down in Bay 9 under a monster, and who had loaded a field surgical rig without waiting for a prefecture release and dared anyone to stop them. Cyril let them through her cordon and asked no questions. The relief corps and the containment caste did not, as a rule, love one another. But there is a thing that happens when word goes out that a young one of the crew is dying on a cold deck, and it happens across every species Cyril had ever served beside, and she had learned long ago to step out of its way. They built the field around the boy without moving him. That was the thing Cyril would remember: 3 medical castes, Vayu and human, and 1 silent, long-limbed Threshi anesthetist, working on their knees on a decompressed deck, raising a pressure tent over a rigger and a predator both, sealing the boy's arranged body inside a bubble of clean, warm air, and the cub inside it with him, because there was no version of the surgery where the cub came out. Ilo had tried to explain it to the anesthetist. The anesthetist had looked at the tilted head and the injured side laid down and the slow gray heartbeat under the boy's jaw, and had said, through its translator, "The animal is doing the airway. I am not going to argue with the airway," and had gone to work. They kept Cole Merrick awake for the first part of it. They had no choice. The cub read the boy's consciousness the way a mother reads a sleeping infant's breathing, and the one time the anesthetist deepened him too far, too fast, the boy's hand slid off the gray foreleg and went limp, and the cub came up out of its stillness in a single surge, teeth bared, the whole tent shuddering as 200 kilos of apex rose to defend a body that had stopped telling it not yet. Ilo got the boy's hand back on the foreleg. She pressed the slack fingers down herself and held them there and said, it's all right, he's here, he's just sleeping, look, he's breathing, feel him breathe." And whether the cub understood the words or only the medic's fear-thinned voice and the rise of the boy's chest, It sank back down slowly and put its head under his jaw and let them work. After that they kept him light enough that the surgery hurt. Light enough that his hand stayed on the foreleg, and his lips could shape the word *easy when the pain climbed. And the cub held its terrible patience, and the vessels along his ribs came closed one by one under the medic's hands. Cyril stood the perimeter and watched the clock in the dark. The prefect's hour was running. She had spent some of it on the log. Danu had pulled the Karsus telemetry before the prefecture seal came down. A clean grab. The transport's own approach record copied to Cyril's authority 30 seconds ahead of the lockout. And she had not yet had time to read it, but she had it. And having knew she had it. And that knowledge was going to make the next hour dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with the animal. But it was not the prefect that pulled Cyril's eye away from the tent, again and again, to the buckled hatch and the long amber throat of the concourse beyond it. It was the dark, because the station had begun, in the last half hour, to make sounds it should not make. A grav door on the level below cycling, that no one had cycled. A pressure sensor in the ventral gangway logging a footfall mass that matched nothing on the crew roster. A recovery team in Bay 11 reporting, in a voice gone suddenly careful, that the dead apex they had been cataloging were arranged differently than they'd left them, moved, drawn together, and that something had eaten. Cyril took each report and set it on the map in her head, and the map told her what she already knew. The scattered pack was gathering itself out of the ruined bays. It was hungry and it was grieving, and it was following a scent through the dark, and the scent led here. Danu, she said, seal Bay 9's approaches, everything but the main hatch. And find me the pack's count, how many adults are unaccounted for. Danu had it in a moment and his voice was not steady. Manifest says 16 adult apex. The dead in Bays 9 and 11 account for 9. The female here makes 10. He swallowed. 6 adult Dreve are loose on this station, warden, and the data burst says, he stopped. Say it. It says a Dreve drift pack that loses its matriarch does not disperse. It consolidates under the next strongest, and it does one of two things. It dens, or it hunts the thing that killed her. Danu looked at the cub, at the boy, at the arranged and careful body inside the tent. It says the pack will come to the matriarch's last mark, to finish what she started or to avenge it. It doesn't say which. It's both, Ilo said, without looking up from the boy's chest. It's always both with grief, ask any species. Cyril looked at the cub. The cub had lifted its head a fraction, off the boy's jaw, and its ears, the wide frost-country ears built to gather sound across open ice, had swung toward the dark of the concourse. And a new sound had come out of it, not the low warning it used on the guards, not the flat promise it saved for the prefect, but a thin rising call, 3 notes, thrown out through the buckled hatch into the throat of the station. A pup calling for its pack. And from somewhere far off in the dark, down through the ruin levels, an answer came back, a long low chord of grown voices, 6 of them drawing nearer. Every guard in the bay heard it. Cyril watched them hear it. She watched the young officers who had wanted so badly to fire on one orphaned cub understand, all at once, that the orphaned cub had never been the danger, and that the danger had just answered its call and was coming up through the dark of a broken station toward this bay, this deck, this arranged and careful body, and that there was not a lance in the room that would matter when it arrived. Warden, Danu said, the pack, if they come and the cub still, if the boy dies on the table and the cub grieves, he didn't finish. Then the boy does not die on the table, Cyril said. She keyed her collar. Medic, how long? Inside the tent, Ilo's hands did not stop moving. The bleed's controlled. I've got the vessels closed. He's stable as I can make him on a deck. She looked up, and her soft-shelled face was wet with the effort of the last hour. Warden, I can keep him alive, but I can't move him and I can't wake him fully, and in about 20 minutes there are going to be 6 grieving apex predators outside that hatch, and the only thing standing between them and my patient is a 6-month-old cub and a boy too weak to lift his hand. She held Cyril's eye. What is your plan for that? Cyril looked at the boy. She looked at the cub, its head lifted, its ears turned to the dark, its call still hanging in the cold air. She looked at the line drawn on the deck between the boy's skull and the hatch, the line the cub would not let anyone cross, and she understood, with the cold clarity that had come to her only a handful of times in 40 years, that she had been thinking about the line the wrong way around. She had thought the cub was keeping the room out. It was not. It had never been. The mother had marked the boy. The mother had died making the boy pack, and the cub was not holding the line to keep the pack away from the boy. It was holding the line to show the pack where the boy was. My plan, Cyril said slowly, is to be standing on the right side of that cub when the pack arrives. She turned to Danu, to the frozen guards, to the young officers with their lowered lances. Stand down, all of you. Lances to the deck. Now. Danu started to protest and she cut him off. The pack is not coming here to kill a human. It is coming here to collect its matriarch's heir and the man she died making pack. And the only way any of us survive the next 20 minutes is if, when 6 Frost Country Apex come through that hatch, the first thing they smell is that we have been keeping their boy alive. She set her own lance on the deck. Weapons down, and somebody get me the prefect. Because whatever that pack decides about the rest of us, I promise you it has already decided about the man who overloaded the transport that killed their matriarch. And I would like him in this bay, on the wrong side of the cub, when they arrive. The prefect did not wait for Cyril's summons. He came back on his own, ahead of his hour, because a prefect who feels a record closing around him does not sit in an office and wait for it, and he came with force. 12 prefecture guards this time, in full containment armor, with the heavy casters and the cutting lances and the wide-mouthed net guns meant for bringing down adult stock, and they came through the buckled hatch in a wedge with halving at the center of it. And the first thing the prefect said, before he was fully in the bay, was, "Warden Osk is relieved. This bay is under prefecture control. Secure the animal." And then he stopped, because Cyril's officers had not raised their lances, and the guards fanning out into the bay found themselves walking into a room where the containment caste stood with its weapons on the deck, watching them, and where a warden of 40 years stood between the wedge and the surgical tent with her hands empty and open at her sides. "You will want to hear this before your guards do anything they cannot undo," Cyril said. "All of you. Because in about 15 minutes 6 adult Dreve are going to come through that hatch. And what happens to every os in this bay when they arrive depends entirely on what we are doing with our hands when they get here. The animals loose on the station are a containment matter and they will be dealt with," having said. "Secure the cub, move the human, I will not say it again." "Danu," Cyril said, "play it." She had read the telemetry. In the 11 minutes it took the medics to build the tent. She had read it standing up, fast, with her back to the dark, the way you read a thing you already know the shape of. And she had found, in the Karsus transport's own approach record, the thing that turned a bureaucrat's cruelty into something the caste board would have to look at whether it wanted to or not. Danu played it on the bay's main display, and the amber light of the ruined dock filled with the clean cold data of the transport's final hour. The mass readout, flashing amber the whole approach, a hold loaded to 1.5 times its rated capacity, the number the young rigger had read and flagged. The rigger's flag itself, time-stamped, in the plain trade tongue of a man doing his job. Cargo mass exceeds transport rating, recommend hold on docking pending review. And the override that closed it, 40 seconds later, prefecture seal, the authorizing officer's identifier stamped in the corner of the record where an override always stamps it, clear as a brand. Having's identifier. "You cleared an overloaded transport onto the docking clamps," Cyril said into the silence. "The rigger flagged it. You closed the flag. The clamps were never rated for that mass. They sheared on contact, and the seals failed, and 9 bays lost pressure, and 40 preserve animals died in their pods, and a matriarch bled out on this deck, and a relief corps rigger is lying in that tent with his chest crushed, all of it. Every death in these bays tonight because you were in a hurry and you had the seal to close the flag with. She let it land. That is the record, Prefect. It is copied to my authority and to the relief corps and to 2 medical castes, and it does not unhappen because you relieve me. The bay was very quiet. The prefect's own guards had stopped moving. They were containment caste too, and they had just heard in the plain voice of the data that the mass panic they had all felt through the hull tonight had a name and a seal on it, and the name was standing in the center of their wedge. The rigger flagged it, having said. His voice had changed. It had gone careful, the way a voice goes when its owner has stopped defending a position and started defending himself. 1 rigger's flag against a convoy schedule. Do you know what a held convoy costs? Do you know how many preserve animals die waiting on a dock while a caste board reviews a rigger's arithmetic? I made a judgment. It was a judgment, any prefect. It was a judgment that killed their matriarch, Cyril said. And that is why the cub will not stop looking at you. Everyone in the bay looked at the cub. It had risen again. Sometime during the playback it had come up off the boy's jaw, the hindquarters still anchored, the airway still held, but the head level and the amber eyes open and fixed, through the wall of the surgical tent, on the prefect at the center of his wedge. And now the sound it made was the flat, even promise, the one it saved only for him, and it had begun, very slowly, to shift its weight forward against the boy's restraining hand. And the boy's hand, Cyril saw it, saw everyone see it, the boy's hand was trembling with the effort of holding it back. It smelled you the whole approach, Cyril said. It was in the hold, Prefect. It smelled an overloaded transport being driven onto the clamps. It smelled its mother's fear. And now you have walked into a bay reeking of the decision you made, and there is not a protocol in the caste that can make a scent hunter unsmell the man who killed its matriarch. You called that dangerous behavior. It was never dangerous behavior. It was a witness. Get it away from me, having said. He had taken a step back into his own wedge, and his guards had not closed around him the way a wedge is supposed to, and the old prefect felt it, the small loosening of the men who had just learned what their commander had done. Warden, Warden, I am ordering you. Get the animal. The pack came through the hatch. They did not come in a rush. That was the thing that emptied the air out of the bay. They came in slow. 6 grown dreve out of the dark of the ruined concourse, slate-gray and enormous, twice the cub's size and more, moving low and spread and silent, frost still clinging to the guard hairs along their spines. They came in on the scent, noses low, and they fanned into the amber light of the bay and stopped, all 6. And for a moment nothing in the world moved but the fall of frost and the rise of a boy's chest inside a tent. The prefecture guards had their casters up. Cyril saw it and knew that everything now stood on the next 3 seconds. Do not fire, she said, low and flat and carrying. You will not kill 6 of them before they cross this bay. If you fire, we all die here. Weapons down. Show them your hands. And the strange thing, the thing Cyril would tell the caste board and they would not believe, was that the guards obeyed not her rank, which she no longer held, but the plain sense of it, the animal sense that every species keeps under its training. And one by one the casters came down, and the containment caste of Karsus Reach stood in a ruined bay and showed its empty hands to a pack of grieving apex. The pack ignored them. 6 grown dreve crossed the bay in a slow spreading tide, and they did not so much as turn a head toward the armed os, standing frozen along the walls, because the os were not the scent they had followed up through the dark. They flowed around the surgical tent, and the medics inside went very still, and the lead dreve, the largest, a scarred male with one ear torn to a stub, put its enormous head down to the boy through the gap where the tent sealed to the deck, and breathed him in. It breathed in the boy. It breathed in the matriarch's mark on the top of the boy's head, the mark she had pressed there before she died. It breathed in the cub curled against the boy's chest, the smallest of the line, alive, kept alive. It breathed in the drain and the blood and the medic's hands and the whole long hour of alien creatures on their knees keeping their matriarch's chosen human breathing on a cold deck. And the scarred male lifted its head and looked at the cub, and the cub looked back at it and made the thin three-note call one more time, softer now, and the male answered it low in its chest, and something passed between them that had no translation in any caste on the reach. Then the scarred male turned its head, slowly, deliberately past the tent, past the medics, past Cyril, and looked at the prefect. Prefect having ran. It was the worst thing he could have done, and Cyril knew at the instant his weight shifted, and she had no time to stop it. A frost country apex is built across 40 kilometers of open ice to close on a thing that runs. The moment the prefect broke for the hatch, 6 grown dreve came off their haunches as one, and the slow grieving tide became a wall of motion, and having made 4 steps before the scarred male hit the deck in front of him and turned him, and the pack closed, and the bay filled with a sound Cyril had heard exactly once before in her life, on a dead world, the sound a pack makes when the hunt is over and only the ending is left. They did not tear him apart. That was the second thing Cyril would tell the caste board that they would not believe. 6 apex predators had a soft old os in the center of a ring, and they did not close it. They held him. The scarred male stood over him with its jaws a hand's width from his throat and its breath moving the film on his eyes, and it waited, and the whole pack waited with it, and Cyril understood that they were waiting for the same thing the cub had been waiting for all night. They were waiting for the boy. "Rigger," Cyril said. She crossed to the tent fast and dropped to her knees at the gap where the cub kept its watch. "Merrick, Cole, can you hear me?" The boy's eyes were open. Somewhere in the last minutes he had come up out of the deep place, dragged up by the sound of his cub calling and the weight of 6 grown pack scents flooding the bay, and he lay on his side with his hand on the gray foreleg and his crushed chest rising in its small, careful rhythm, and he was looking at the ring of predators around the prefect, and Cyril could not read a human face the way she read her own kind, but she thought that what was on this one was not fear. "They're waiting for you," Cyril said. "The pack, do you understand? The matriarch marked you. To them you are, I do not have the word, the keeper of the line, and they have the man who killed her, and they will not close until the keeper says close. That is what they are waiting for." She put her plated hand flat on the deck where the boy could see it. "I will not lie to you, Rigger. He killed their matriarch. He would have killed your cub, and he would have let you die on this deck to bury a record. By every law your species or mine has ever written, what happens to him next is yours to say. The pack has given it to you. You have only to say the word." The boy looked at the prefect. Having looked back at him from the center of the ring, and the old prefect's careful voice was gone, and what came out of him was small. "Rigger, boy, listen to me. It was a judgment, a convoy schedule, you flagged it, I know you flagged it, I saw the flag, his mandibles worked. Call it off, call them off. I am a prefect of the containment caste, I am worth more to you alive. There are things I can make the record go away, I can make you a wealthy." "Gray," the boy said. The cub lifted its head from his jaw. "It's okay," the boy said. His voice was a thread, but it carried in the frozen bay, and every creature in it, plated and soft-shelled and slate-gray and human, went still to hear it. "It's okay, Gray, I've got it, you did good, you held the line all night, you can let me do this part." He moved his hand off the foreleg the first time in 6 hours and laid it flat on the top of the cub's head instead, and the cub trembled under it and did not move. "Warden," the boy said. "Cyril. Can they understand me, the pack?" "They understand you well enough," Cyril said. "They have understood you since the female pressed her nose to your head. Say it plainly, and they will read it." The boy was quiet for a moment. His chest rose and fell. Across the bay, the scarred male held the prefect's throat a hand's width from its jaws and waited, and the film-eyed old os, who had closed a flag and killed a matriarch and 40 animals and nearly killed a rigger to bury it, lay in the ring of teeth and waited too, and the whole ruined station seemed to lean in over the buckled hatch to hear what the keeper of the line would say. Let him up, the boy said. Cyril had been 40 years in the containment caste, and she had never once been surprised by mercy, because she had stopped expecting it, and she was surprised now. So was the prefect. So she thought, were the guards along the walls and the medics in the tent, and perhaps even the pack. The scarred male's ear flicked, and its head turned toward the boy, and it did not move off the prefect. Let him up, the boy said again, and now there was something under the thread of his voice, something that had gone hard, and it was not weakness that had made him say it. Not because he deserves it. He doesn't. He killed your mother, Gray, and he'd have killed you, and I know it. I smelled the transport same as you did. I read the number he closed. But if you kill him here in this bay, then for the rest of your life they get to call you what they wanted to call you all along. Dangerous. Feral. A thing that had to be put down. And I didn't lie here all night holding onto your leg so they could be right about you. His hand tightened on the gray skull. He's going to answer for it, every death in these bays. But he's going to answer for it in front of their whole caste, on the record the warden kept, where everyone can see what he did and what you did. And what you did, Gray, was keep a man alive all night with your mother's mark still warm on his head. That's what they're going to remember. Not this. That. He drew a breath, a bad one, and let it out. Let him up. For a long moment nothing moved. Then the scarred male lifted its head off the prefect's throat and stepped back, and the ring of the pack opened, and Prefect Havin of the containment caste of Karsus Reach scrambled up off the deck on his hands, and his plated knees in front of 12 of his own guards and 2 medical castes, and a warden of 40 years, and there was nothing left of the weather he had walked in on. He got to his feet in the amber light with frost in the seams of his overmantle and his mandibles trembling, and he looked at the boy, and the boy looked back at him with a hand on the head of a monster's child, calm, ordinary, 22 years old and dying and entirely unafraid. And it was the prefect who could not hold the look. It was the prefect who turned his face away. Denu, Cyril said quietly. Prefect Havin is detained on the record I sealed at the start of this watch. Negligence, falsification, and the deaths in bays 9 through 15. She looked at the old os, at the ruin of him. Take his seal. They took his seal. Cyril watched them do it. Watched a guard lift the gray overmantle's clasp from the prefect's carapace and fold it away, and she watched the pack watch it too, 6 grown dreve and 1 cub, sitting now in a loose ring around the boy and the tent, their heads following the folded mantle, and she had the strange certain sense that they understood exactly what had been taken and from whom, and that to them it meant more than the throat they had let go. The keeper of the line had not spilled the prefect's blood. He had done something the pack had no teeth for and could only witness. He had made the prefect small in front of everyone and let him live to stay that way. That, said Ilo softly, from inside the tent, her hand still on the boy's chest, is the most human thing I have ever seen, and I have no idea whether it was mercy or the cruelest thing in this bay. Both, said Cyril. It's always both. Ask any species. And she looked at the boy, gone slack again now that the hard part was done, his hand sliding gentle off the gray skull, and she keyed her collar and said, Medic, he's given us the bay, now give me the boy. Tell me what you need to keep him. Keeping the boy meant moving him, and moving him meant the one thing the cub had refused all night, and there was exactly one creature on Karsus Reach who could give the cub permission, and he kept losing consciousness. The deck field bought us the bleed, Ilo said fast, her hands never stopping. It did not buy us the crush. There's a fragment of rib driven in against the pericardium, the sac around his heart. I can see it on the scan and I cannot reach it here. If it shifts, it opens the sac and then I have minutes and no table. He needs the surgical suite on level 2. He needs it now. She looked up at Cyril. Which means we lift him, and we carry him 400 meters through a wrecked station. And we keep his airway open the whole way, and we do it without the cub deciding we're killing him. Then the cub comes, Cyril said. The cub is doing the airway. Of course the cub comes. It's the 6 others I'm worried about. They all looked at the pack. 6 grown dreve sat in their loose ring around the tent, and they had not moved since the prefect was taken, and they watched the medics work with an attention that was not hunger and was not threat and was, Cyril thought, closer to the way a caste watches its own healers tend one of its wounded. But they were 6 Frost Country Apex in a relief station full of soft-shelled personnel, and there was no protocol in the reach for walking them 400 meters up a public gangway. "They'll come whether we plan for it or not," Cyril said. "The boy is the center of the pack now. Where he goes, they go. So we do not fight it. We clear the route, we pull every soul off levels 1 and 2 who does not need to be there, and we let the pack escort its own." She keyed her collar and began giving the orders. The gangway cleared. The grav lift held. The infirmary staff briefed, and she added, warned. Because there is a difference between hearing that a pack of apex is coming and having 6 of them flow through your surgical doors. And someone wakes the boy enough to tell the cub it's all right. Nothing moves until he does. They woke him. It took a moment and it cost him. The pain came up in his face as the anesthetist lightened him, and his hand found the gray foreleg by itself, and the cub pressed close. "Cole," Ilo said, close to his ear. "Cole, we have to move you to a real table up on 2. Gray comes with you the whole way, I promise, but we have to lift you, and I need you to tell him it's okay. He won't let us lift you unless you tell him." The boy's eyes found the cub. "Gray," he breathed. "We're going for a ride. Stay on me. Stay right here. Don't get down. I need you to hold my head just like you've been doing. Can you do that? Stay on me and let them carry us both." He moved his hand, laid it over the cub's paw. "It's okay. It's the same as all night, just moving now. Easy." Cyril watched the cub understand. She could not have said how it understood the words, the tone, the boy's own calm. The 6 adult sense in the room telling it the pack was here and the danger was past, but it understood. And when the medic slid the transfer board under the boy in the exact tilted posture the cub had built, the cub did not surge, did not bare its teeth. It rode. It stayed pressed to the boy's chest with its head under his jaw, holding the airway open with the same slate-gray skull, and it let itself be lifted with him. 200 kilos of apex balanced on a rigger's failing chest, and Cyril heard one of the young officers make a small, stunned sound, and did not blame him for it. They carried him out through the buckled hatch, and the pack rose and came with them. It was a thing the station would talk about for a long time afterward, the ones who saw it, and the ones who only heard, and the ones who watched it later on the corridor logs. A relief corps rigger on a transfer board, held in a careful tilt, a slate-gray cub riding his chest with its head under his jaw. 3 medical castes around him, hands on the board, moving in the small, quick steps of people who cannot jog and cannot stop. A warden of the containment caste walking point with her lance still on the deck of the bay behind her, her hands empty. And behind and around them, filling the width of the gangway, 6 grown Dreve, moving low and silent and matched to the medic's pace, frost still in the guard hairs along their spines, their heads swinging slow across every hatch and cross corridor, escorting their keeper up through the broken heart of the station. Personnel had been pulled off the route, but not all of them, and the ones who remained pressed themselves flat against the bulkheads as the procession passed. Cyril watched their faces. Cargo handlers and lift techs, and a knot of prefecture clerks and a threshy maintenance crew, every species on the reach, and every one of them wore the same expression as the pack flowed by an arm's length away. Not the shock of danger, though there was danger in it, but the deeper shock of watching a thing they had no shelf to put it on. Apex predators, loose, unrestrained, close enough to touch, and every one of them ignoring the soft bodies against the walls to keep pace with a dying human boy and the cub on his chest. Cyril saw a cargo handler's hand rise to cover his mouth. She saw a young clerk sink slowly down the bulkhead to sit on the deck, not from fear, she thought, but because his legs had simply stopped holding him up. She saw the threshy maintenance crew, who did not as a species make sounds of awe, stand in a silent row with their long hands hanging, and their heads turned to follow the pack all the way down the gangway. "It's not natural," one of the prefecture clerks whispered as they passed, and Cyril, walking point, heard it and turned her head. "No," she agreed. "It isn't. It's better than natural. Natural is the prefect closing a flag to make a schedule. This," she nodded at the pack, at the boy, at the cub holding a rigger's airway open with the side of its face. "This is what natural looks like when someone bothers to be kind to it first. Stand aside." They reached the grav lift, and the lift was too small for the pack. It was the first hard thing since the bay, and it stopped the whole procession in the mouth of the shaft. The lift would take the board and the medics and the cub. It would not take 6 adult Dreve. And the pack, faced with a shaft that would carry its keeper up and away out of scent, began to make a sound Cyril had not heard from it yet, low, uneven, the 6 voices climbing over one another, and the scarred male put itself in the mouth of the lift and would not let the board pass. "Warden," Ilo said tightly, "the pericardium." "We do not have time for this." Cyril looked at the scarred male, and the scarred male looked at the shaft that would take the boy, and Cyril understood the shape of the problem. The pack had spent all night and a matriarch's death, and a hunt across a broken station to gather to their keeper, and now a hole in the wall was proposing to take him somewhere they could not follow, and no protocol in any caste was going to make that acceptable to a grieving apex on the strength of a warden's word. But the boy was still barely awake. "Cole," Cyril said, dropping to the board, "the lift will not take the pack, only you and the cub and the medics. The pack cannot follow. They do not understand it, and if they do not understand it, they will not let you go, and the medic says you do not have the time to argue." She put her plated face close to his. "Tell them, not the cub, them, the whole pack, tell them you are coming back." What the boy did next, Cyril entered into the record word for word, because she did not believe the caste board would accept it otherwise, and because she was not entirely sure she believed it herself. He was dying. He had a rib fragment a hair's width from the sac around his heart, and he had lost enough blood to gray the color out of his lips, and it cost him visibly to lift his head off the board even a finger's width. But he lifted it, and he looked past the cub on his chest at the 6 grown apex crowded into the mouth of the lift shaft, and he spoke to them the way a man speaks to his crew when the crew is frightened, and there is no time to be gentle about it. "Hey," his voice was almost nothing. The scarred male's ears came forward anyway. "Hey, look at me, I'm hurt. You can smell it, you know I'm hurt. These ones are going to fix me up there where you can't come." He drew a breath and it caught and he pushed through it. "I'm not leaving, I'm coming back down. Gray stays on me the whole time, Gray holds my head, and when they're done fixing me I come back down to you. You hold the bay, that's your job. Hold the bay, keep everyone off, and I come back." His hand had found the edge of the board and he gripped it white. "I came back for your matriarch's kid when the world fell in. You think I won't come back for you? Hold the bay. I'm coming back." Cyril did not know how much of it the pack took as words and how much as the plain animal weight of a keeper's voice throwing calm across a frightened room. But she watched the scarred male lower its head, and she watched it back one slow step out of the mouth of the lift, and she watched the pack settle, not easily, not without a low uneven complaint that ran through all 6 of them like wind through wire, and she watched them let the shaft take him. The lift doors closed on the boy and the cub and the medics. Cyril stayed on the wrong side of them, in the gangway, with 6 grieving apex and a station full of terrified castes, because someone had to, and because she had discovered somewhere in the last hours that she trusted the pack more than she trusted most of the people she outranked. The pack held the bay. They went back down the gangway the way they had come, slow and spread and silent, and they took up a ring around the mouth of Bay 9 where their matriarch had died and their keeper had been kept alive, and they lay down facing outward and they waited. Cyril put a cordon around them, not to contain them, she told Danu, but to contain the personnel, because the fastest way to get someone killed now would be to let a frightened clerk wander into the pack's ring. She stood the cordon herself for the first hour, and she watched the pack wait for the boy the way she had once, a long time ago on a colder world, watched her own kind wait outside a healer's door, and she stopped, somewhere in that hour, thinking of them as animals at all. Up on level 2, they opened the boy's chest. Cyril had the surgery relayed to her collar, because she had made herself responsible for the boy, and she was not going to stand a cordon in ignorance. She heard Ilo's voice go flat and fast the way a healer's voice does when the work gets close. She heard the moment they lifted the rib fragment clear of the sack, heard the anesthetist say a number, and Ilo say another number back, and a long pause in which the only sound was the machine breathing for a boy who could not. And through all of it, under the medical voices, she heard the cub. They had not been able to take it off him. They had tried. A surgical field is no place for 200 kilos of apex, and the sweet staff had reasonably wanted the animal gone. But the moment they eased the cub back from the boy's jaw, the boy's airway had faltered, the tilt lost, the crushed chest fighting for air that would not come clean, and the cub had refused to be moved regardless, and in the end they had done the only thing left to do. They had scrubbed the cub. They had draped it in sterile field cloth like a second surgeon, and they had let it stay, its head under the boy's jaw, holding the airway open through the whole procedure the way it had held it all night on the deck. And the surgical record of Carsus Reach would forever after contain the line, entered by a VU medic with no idea how else to note it. Airway maintained throughout by attending fauna. The cub held the boy's head. The medics closed the sack and set the rib and stopped the last of the bleeding, and the machine breathed, and the slow gray heartbeat under the boy's jaw never once changed its pace, steady, patient. A hand knocking on a far door, "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." At the end of the third hour, Ilo's voice came over Cyril's collar, cracked and exhausted, and something else. "Warden, the sack's intact, the bleed stopped. He's the fragments out, the lungs re-expanding." A shaky breath. "He's going to live. If nothing turns in the next day, he's going to live." Cyril stood in the gangway with 6 grieving apex at her back and closed her eyes. "Warden," Danu beside her, uncertain. "Do we tell them, the pack?" Cyril looked at the ring of Dreve around the mouth of Bay 9. They had lifted their heads, all 6 at once in the same moment, the moment she realized that Ilo's voice had said he's going to live 3 floors up through steel they should not have been able to hear through. But a Dreve tracks a wounded animal across 40 kilometers of ice by blood scent alone, and the boy was pack. And perhaps there is a thing a pack knows about the one at its center that does not need floors or steel or a warden's word. "They already know," Cyril said. The scarred male rose. It turned its great scarred head up the gangway, toward the lift, toward the 3 floors of steel and the surgical suite and the boy who had told it hold the bay. "I'm coming back." And it threw back its head and it called, one long rising note, and the whole pack came up off the deck and joined it. 6 grown voices and the answer of a cub 3 floors up, and the sound of it rolled through the broken station from the ruined bays to the cold high docks, and every soul on Carsus Reach who heard it, of every caste and species, stopped whatever they were doing and stood still, because they had never heard anything like it, and they understood, without being told, that they were hearing a pack that had lost its matriarch tell the station that it had not, after all, lost everything. The containment caste convened its board of inquiry 4 days later, and it did not want to talk about the prefect. Cyril had expected that. The prefect was already finished. The record she had sealed had gone up the chain past any hand that could bury it, and having it been stripped of his seal and confined pending a full tribunal on the deaths in 9 bays, and the caste did not enjoy looking at what one of its own prefects had done, so the caste wished to look at something else. And the something else, when Cyril walked into the board chamber, was arranged on the display in cold, clean lines under a heading she had come to hate. Classification of hazard, preserve fauna Carsus Reach. Recommendation, containment and disposition. Warden Osk. The board speaker was an old Oss named Vetch, dry and precise, a caste lawyer to the seams of her carapace. You obstructed a lawful termination order. You forged a prefecture requisition. You stood down armed personnel in the presence of loose apex, and you permitted 6 adult predators to move unrestrained through 3 levels of a populated station. Any one of these ends a career. You will have the opportunity to explain yourself. But first the board must dispose of the hazard, and the hazard is this. There are 7 Dreve on Karsus Reach, 6 adult, 1 juvenile, and they are, by every standard this caste holds, uncontainable apex fauna loose in civilian space. The recommendation before the board is disposition. A pause, termination. You will understand the board must consider it. I understand the board is about to make the same mistake the prefect made, Cyril said, and I would like to stop it before it is on the record. Vetch's mandibles stilled. Explain. So Cyril explained. She had 4 days to build it, and she built it plainly, the way she built everything, without ornament, because ornament was for people who did not trust their facts. She put the whole night on the board's display, Danu's sealed sensory record, the one she had ordered logged before she understood why she was ordering it, and she made the board watch it. She made them watch the cub hold a scrap of sleeve unbroken in jaws that could crack a strut. She made them watch it draw a line on the deck and hold that line against an armed room. She made them watch the medic's scan, and the tilted head, and the injured side laid down, and Ilo's flat exhausted voice saying whatever's holding him is holding him in the only position that's kept him alive. She made them watch the prefect walk into the bay reeking of the decision he had made, and the cub track him and only him, and she made them hear the boy say not yet. She made them watch a pack of grieving apex ignore a room full of soft bodies to keep pace with a dying rigger up a public gangway. She made them watch the cub, draped in field cloth, hold a boy's airway open through 3 hours of surgery. Then she stood in front of the board of the containment caste, and she said the thing she had come to say. This caste has one classification for an animal that stands over a body and will not let anyone approach it, Cyril said. We call it dangerous behavior. We have called it that for as long as the caste has existed, and we have a protocol for it, and the protocol is the lance. And we are not wrong that the behavior is dangerous. It is. That cub could have killed everyone in Bay 9. Those 6 adults could have killed everyone on 3 levels. The danger was real. She let that sit. But the classification is a lie, because dangerous behavior tells you what the animal could do, and it tells you nothing at all about what the animal is doing. And what that cub was doing for 6 hours on a cold deck was keeping a crushed man breathing in the one position that kept his heart from drowning. We had no word for that, so we reached for the only word we had, and the word we had was going to get the boy killed. You are describing an exceptional case, Vetch said. I am describing a category error, Cyril said, and the boy nearly died of it, and if this board disposes of that pack, it will die of it again in front of the whole reach. She keyed her own slate and put a new document on the board's display, one she had spent 3 of her 4 days drafting, and it was the reason she had come. I am submitting a new classification to the caste behavioral code. I am asking the board to enter it as protected. That is, a behavior which, when observed, suspends the termination protocol pending assessment. I have given it a name so that no officer walking into a bay in 40 years' time reaches for the lance the way I nearly did. The board read it. Sarah watched them read it, the whole dry precise row of them, and she watched the name land. The warm vigil, the document said. A guarding posture in which apex fauna maintains protective custody of a living, injured, or vulnerable individual, as distinct from a kill guard over prey. Distinguishing markers. The guarded individual is uninjured by the guardian. The guardian's aggression is directional, discriminating threat from non-threat. The guarded individual's condition improves in the guardian's custody. Where the warm vigil is observed, the termination protocol is suspended, and the burden falls on the caste to discover why the animal has chosen to keep this one alive. Because the animal has already made a judgment the caste has not yet caught up to. The chamber was quiet for a long time. You are asking this board, Vetch said at last slowly, to write into the caste code that when an apex predator will not let us near a body, Our first assumption should be that it is protecting the body, not guarding a kill. Protecting it. I am asking this board to catch up to a 6-month-old cub, Cyril said, which held a judgment all night that took the rest of us until dawn to understand. Yes, that is what I am asking. She thought it would fail. She had built it to be entered into the record whether it passed or not, so that the next warden would find it there, so that the next boy on the next cold deck would have a word standing between him and the lance. She had not built it to win. It won. It won because the board was Os, and the Os were rule-bound to the marrow, and Cyril had given them a rule, a clean, precise, protocol-shaped rule with distinguishing markers and a suspension clause, exactly the kind of thing the caste knew how to obey. And it won because every officer in that chamber had by then seen the record, and there is a limit to how many times even a caste lawyer can watch a cub hold a scrap of sleeve unbroken and go on calling it a kill. Vetch entered the warm vigil into the behavioral code of the containment caste, protected classification, termination suspended pending assessment, and she entered it under Cyril's authority. And then she looked up over the display at the warden who had forged a requisition and stood down an armed room, and she said, dryly, "The board notes that you also broke a great many protocols on the night in question." "I did," Cyril said. "The board notes," Vetch said, "that had you not, there would be a dead rigger, a terminated pack, and a prefect still wearing his seal and no record of any of it." She folded her hands. "The matter of your conduct is continued indefinitely, Warden Osk, which is the caste's way of saying we would prefer not to look at it too closely. Now sit down. There is still the question of what a populated station is to do with 7 Frost Country Apex who have decided a Relief Corps rigger is their pack. And I am told the rigger has woken up and is asking for his cub and will not be reasoned with." Cole Merrick woke up in a clean bed with a tube in his chest and a machine counting his breaths, and the first thing he did, before he knew his own name, was reach for a weight that was not there. His hand closed on cool sheet. No fur, no slow far heartbeat under his jaw, no gray. The monitors caught the spike in him before he was fully awake, and by the time Ilo reached his bedside, he had the tube half out of his own chest and was trying to sit up on a surgical repair 4 days old, and the words coming out of him were not words yet, just a hoarse repeated sound that resolved as the medic got his hands down into a name. "Gray, Gray, where is he? Where's Gray?" "He's here," Ilo said, holding him. "He's on the station, he's fine, he's Cole, stop, you'll tear the repair. He's fine. He's downstairs, lie back and I'll tell you." He lay back because he had no strength not to, she told him. The cub was alive, the pack was alive, the prefect was finished, the whole night had held. And then she told him the part she did not want to tell him because it was protocol and because it was killing him, and both of those were true at once. The cub was not allowed on the infirmary level. Apex fauna in a surgical recovery ward, it could not be permitted. The ward was sterile, the other patients were fragile, the caste had rules. The cub had been kept below in a secured hold near the pack, and it was, Ilo admitted, not doing well. "Not doing well how?" Cole said. Ilo hesitated. "It won't eat. It stands at the cordon between the hold and the lift, facing up, and it won't come away from it. The pack's the same, they've stopped hunting the loose stores, they've stopped everything, they just lie at the base of the lift shaft looking up." Her soft-shelled face was unhappy. "The behaviorists say they used the word declining. A cub separated from its bonded individual. They see it in the preserve records. It's not physical. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just." "It's waiting for me to come back," Cole said. "I told it I'd come back, and I didn't come back, and now it thinks." He stopped. His breath had gone bad, the machine chirping, and he made himself slow it, the way he'd learned on the deck, small and high. "It held my head all night, Ilo. It held the line so I could breathe. And it's down there right now thinking I lied to it." "You have to take me down." "You had your chest opened 4 days ago," Ilo said. "You cannot go down." "Then bring it up." It's an apex predator in a surgical ward, Cole. I can't. It held my airway open through the surgery, Cole said, draped in your field cloth in your sterile suite, and nobody died of it. You wrote it down. Airway maintained throughout by attending fauna. I read the chart. He'd found her eyes and he held them, and Ilo, who had spent 4 days keeping this boy alive and had come to be fond of him in the way medics become fond of the ones they pull back, felt the argument go out of her, because he was right and they both knew it. It's not going to hurt anyone. It's going to lie on my bed and put its head under my jaw, and we're both going to be better for it. And you know that because you were on that deck. Please, bring me my cub. It was Cyril who broke the cordon. She came up to the infirmary level an hour after the board rose, still in her caste gray, and she found the ward staff in a knot outside Cole's room, and the behaviorist arguing protocol, and Ilo in the middle of it losing a fight she was right about, and Cyril listened to exactly none of it. She keyed her slate and put a document on the ward's display, the same document the board had entered that morning, and she read the relevant line aloud in the flat carrying voice she used when she had stopped asking. Where the warm vigil is observed, Cyril read, the burden falls on the caste to discover why the animal has chosen to keep this one alive. It is entered in the behavioral code as of this morning, protected classification. She lowered the slate. The animal downstairs is conducting a warm vigil. It has been conducting it unbroken since a matriarch pressed her nose to this boy's head in Bay 9. And this caste is currently interrupting a protected behavior. On my authority, I am ending the interruption. And if any behaviorist in this ward would like to be the officer who tells the board why he stood between a warm vigil and its subject, he may put his name to it now. No behaviorist put his name to it. They brought the cub up. Cole heard it before he saw it, a sound in the corridor, claws on decking, quick and uneven and building, and then a voice he knew, Danu's, saying, "Easy, easy, the door's right there." And then the door opened and a slate-gray shape came through it low and fast and hit the bed hard enough to move it. And Cole got his arms up and around a neck he had held onto all night and had not been able to hold since. And the cub climbed him the way it had climbed him on the deck, careful even now. Careful of the tube and the repair, and it put its head under his jaw and pressed there and shook, its whole body shaking. And Cole Merrick held a monster's child in a clean white bed and put his face down into the frost country fur and did not, for a while, say anything at all. "Hey," he said finally when he could. "Hey, I told you I'd come back." His hand found the place behind the cub's ear that he had found on the deck without knowing he'd found it and worked it slow. "You held the bay, good boy. You held the bay and I came back, it's okay. Easy now, easy, Gray. I've got you." Cyril stood in the doorway and watched it, and behind her the ward staff and the beaten behaviorists watched it, and down at the base of the lift shaft 3 levels below, 6 grown dreve that had not eaten in a day and a half lifted their heads all at once, and got to their feet, and went, at last, to hunt. Because the one at the center of the pack had been made whole, and a pack knows the health of its center the way a body knows its own heart. Through steel and distance, and every rule the containment caste had ever written, and the caste was only now, slowly, beginning to learn that this had been true the entire time. "Warden," Ilo said quietly beside her, "that's going to be the easiest patient recovery I've ever charted, isn't it?" "Yes," said Cyril. "And the loudest, when the other 6 decide they want up here too, post a guard on the lift, not to keep them down." She watched the boy and the cub, the ordinary human and the frost country apex, breathing in the same slow rhythm they had found on a cold deck 4 days ago and never quite lost. To keep the ward from panicking when they come, because they are going to come. That is a pack and this is their keeper, and there is no protocol on this station strong enough to keep them from him for long. There never was. We just spent 40 years pretending there was. They came the next morning. Cyril had known they would, and she had spent the night arguing the ward into readiness, and it had not been enough, because there is no readiness for the moment 6 adult dreve flow out of a grav lift into a corridor of soft-shelled patients and recovering castes. The ward staff scattered. A threshy orderly dropped a tray of instruments and stood frozen against a wall with its long hands over its face. And the pack ignored all of it, every terrified body in every doorway, and went up the corridor on the scent of their keeper, noses low, to the room where a rigger lay healing with a cub against his chest. And they filled the doorway and looked in, and they did not come further because the room was too small to hold what they were. So Cole came to them. He got up out of the clean bed against every order Ilo gave him, one hand braced on Gray's shoulder for the weight his own legs could not yet carry, and he crossed to the doorway on a 4-day surgical repair and stood in it. And the pack closed over him, the scarred male first, its huge head down against his chest, breathing him, and then the rest, a slow crush of slate-gray muscle around a young man who should not have been standing. And Cole put his face into the scarred male's neck and stayed there a while, and when he lifted it, his eyes were wet and he was, unmistakably, all right. "They needed to see me upright," he said, to no one, to Ilo, to Cyril in the corridor beyond. "That's all. They've been lying at the bottom of a lift shaft for a day and a half smelling that their keeper was cut open 3 floors up. They needed to smell that I was standing." He worked his fingers into the scarred male's ruff. "Now they'll settle. Watch." They settled. Cyril watched it happen, watched the pack read, off some channel she would never have, that the center of it was healing and upright in theirs, and watched the terrible tension go out of 6 grown apex all at once. The scarred male turned and lay down across the threshold of the room, facing the corridor, and the others banked down along the wall outside. And within the hour the ward that had scattered in terror was creeping back to its work around a pack of frost country predators that had, apparently, decided to move in. They never did leave. For the 3 weeks of Cole's recovery the pack held the infirmary corridor the way it had held Bay 9, and the ward learned to live with it, and Cyril watched a thing happen that she filed away as carefully as anything else that season. The soft-shelled caste stopped being afraid. Not because the danger was gone, the danger lay across the doorway every night, enormous, breathing, but because they saw, day after day, what the danger was for. They saw the pack part to let a medic through to the boy. They saw a winter-thin nurse-gassed orderly, who had dropped a tray in terror on the first morning, come to leave scraps for the scarred male by the 3rd week and get, in return, the slow, deep chest rumble that Cyril had learned meant a Dreve had filed you under kin. She saw the whole ward learn, without anyone teaching it, the lesson the caste board had needed a document to hold, that a thing can be deadly and gentle in the same body, and that which one you meet depends entirely on who you have decided to be to it. "They're going to be impossible to get off this station," Ilo said one evening, watching the scarred male let a cub-sized medical drone trundle past its nose unharmed. "You know that." "I know," Cyril said. "That is a problem for the disposition board." She watched Cole through the doorway, asleep at last in the clean bed with Gray along his side and the pack banked outside like a wall against the dark. "But it is a good problem. A month ago the problem was 7 apex we did not know how to kill without dying. Now the problem is 7 apex we do not know how to make leave. I will take the second problem." She almost smiled. "It is the better one to have." Haven's tribunal opened 3 weeks later, and Cole Merrick attended it in a powered chair with a cub the size of a young lion lying across his feet. And the cub was the reason the tribunal is still talked about on Karsus Reach. Gray had grown. That was the thing nobody had been ready for, least of all Cole. A frost country apex on a preserve grows slow, rationed against the cold and the hunt. A frost country apex fed clean protein on a warm station by a rigger who could not stop feeding it grows the way spring grows, all at once and without asking. In 3 weeks the cub that had held a scrap of sleeve unbroken had put on a third of its length again, and its shoulders had thickened, and the amber eyes now met a standing osses at the chest. It was not a cub anymore, not really. It was becoming the thing its mother had been, and everyone who looked at it could see the shape of that coming, and it lay across the boy's feet in the tribunal chamber, and watched the proceedings with a stillness that emptied the room of small talk. Cole had not wanted to bring it. The caste had not wanted him to bring it either. A live apex in a tribunal chamber was a thing with no protocol, until Cyril reminded the board dryly that they had written one, and that the warm vigil did not end because its subject could walk again. So Gray came and lay across the boy's feet, and the 6 adults waited in a cleared hold below with a guard posted not to keep them in but to keep the frightened out, and the tribunal of the containment caste sat down to look, at last, at what one of its prefects had done. It was worse than the bay. Cyril testified first and put the record on the display, and the tribunal watched the night in Bay 9 the way the board had. But the tribunal's investigators had spent 3 weeks on the seal having had used to close the rigger's flag, and they had found that it was not the first flag that seal had closed. It was the 40th. Prefect Havin had been clearing overloaded convoys onto the Carsis clamps for 2 years, signing off on transports carrying half again their rated mass, because a full transport ran fewer trips, and fewer trips ran cheaper, and the prefecture's efficiency figures were the latter having had been climbing toward a seat on the Reach's High Council. 40 flags. 40 riggers and dockhands and cargo techs across 2 years who had read a number that did not add up and filed it, doing their jobs, and 40 times the prefecture seal had closed the flag inside a minute, and 39 times the clamps had held. The 40th time they had not. The witness will confirm, the tribunal speaker said to Cole, that on the night in question he filed a flag against the Carsis convoy's cargo mass. I did, Cole said. His voice had come back mostly. He sat in the chair with his hand resting on the gray shoulder at his feet, and he did not look at Havin, who sat across the chamber without a seal on his carapace, smaller than Cyril remembered him, the yellow of his plating gone dull. I read the manifest against the exchanger load while I was working the cold hold. The numbers were off by half. I flagged it, recommended a hold. It got closed before I was out of the crawlway. And do you know now who closed it? I do. Will you look at him, the tribunal speaker said, and tell the chamber what his decision cost? And Cole Merrick turned his chair slow and looked across the tribunal chamber at the old Os, who had killed a matriarch and 40 animals, and nearly killed him to bury a record, and the whole room braced for what a young man in a powered chair with an apex at his feet might say to the creature that had crushed his chest and orphaned his cub. Gray lifted its head off the deck. Its amber eyes found Havin, and its lip drew back, and the flat even sound started up low in its chest. The promise, the one it had saved for this Os, and no other since the night in the bay, and every soul in the chamber went still, because they had all read the record and they all knew that the pack downstairs would come through the deck if the boy so much as changed his tone. His decision killed Gray's mother, Cole said. He did not raise his voice. He put his hand flat on the cub's shoulder, and at the touch the flat sound eased, though the amber eyes did not leave the prefect. She died standing between the wreck and her cub and me. 40 animals died in their pods. 9 bays lost pressure. Good people spent that night pulling bodies out of the cold. His hand moved slow on the gray shoulder, and I lay on a deck for 6 hours with my chest crushed, and the only reason I'm sitting here is that a 6-month-old cub knew how to keep me breathing when your whole caste wanted to lift me flat and finish it. He was quiet a moment. You called it dangerous behavior. You wrote that in the order, terminate on contact. You looked at a cub keeping a man alive and you called it dangerous, because a dead man and a dead cub was a closed flag, and a closed flag was a clean record, and a clean record was your council seat. He shook his head slow. You didn't kill their matriarch because you're cruel, prefect. That's the part I keep coming back to. You killed her because you were in a hurry and you had a seal, and nobody's number ever mattered more to you than your schedule. 40 riggers told you the truth and you closed it 40 times. We're not dangerous behavior. We were just inconvenient arithmetic. That's all any of us ever were to you. He turned his chair back to the tribunal. I don't want him hurt, Cole said. "The pack does. They take him through the floor right now if I let them, and part of me, I won't lie to this room, part of me wanted to let them on the deck when they had him. But if I'd let them, then he'd have been right. He'd have been right about Gray the whole time. So no. I want him to sit in front of your whole caste every day of this, and I want the record read out, all 40 flags, and I want everyone on this reach to know that the beast in this room isn't the one lying across my feet. Gray held my head all night. That's what a beast does, apparently." The prefect closed a flag to make a schedule. He looked finally, one last time, at Havin and the old Oss who could not hold it, and turned his face away in front of the whole assembled caste, the second time Cyril had watched him do it, and the more complete for being public. "You want to know what your decision cost," Cole said. "It cost you the only thing you were ever climbing for. Now everyone knows your name. Just not the way you wanted." The tribunal stripped Prefect Havin of caste rank and standing that day, and remanded him to the Reach's civilian judiciary on 40 counts of falsification and the deaths that came of them. And it was, the record would show, the plainest and least merciful sentence the containment caste had handed down in a generation. Not because the caste had grown crueler, but because a relief corps rigger in a powered chair had refused to let the pack make a martyr of the man, and had instead made him small. In the open, on the record, forever. "That," Cyril said quietly to Ilo, in the back of the chamber, as they wheeled the boy out with the cub pacing at his side, "is the thing my caste will never understand about his. We would have killed the prefect and called it justice. The boy left him breathing and called it the same thing, and the boy's is worse. The boy's is so much worse." She watched the cub match its stride to the powered chair, protective, easy, groan. "Remind me never to be inconvenient arithmetic to a human." The syndicate came for the pack, the day Cole walked out of the infirmary on his own feet. He had been dreading the disposition question, and so had Cyril. 7 Frost Country Apex could not simply live on a transit station. Everyone understood that, Cole included. What Cole had not understood, until a soft-spoken factor of the Oral Preserve Syndicate arrived on Karsus Reach with a writ and a crating crew, was that the pack was not, in the eyes of the law, his to keep or the station's to place. The Karsus stock had been pulled off the dying preserve on oral funding. Rescued preserve fauna belonged to the syndicate that financed the rescue. That was written down, older than the night in Bay 9, and the factor had come to collect his property. His name was Corin, and he was not cruel the way Havin had been cruel. That was almost worse. He was reasonable. He stood in the stations holding bay with his writ and his manifest and his crew of professional handlers, and he explained, in the patient voice of a man who has explained many difficult things to many attached keepers, that the surviving oral stock, 6 adults and 1 juvenile of a critically reduced species, was of enormous conservation value, that it would be transported to the syndicate's core preserve where it could be bred and studied and kept safe, that this was, in fact, the best possible outcome for the animals, and that the rigger's evident bond with the juvenile was touching but was not, he was sorry to say, a legal interest. "You want to crate them," Cole said. "Sedate and crate, yes, standard transport. They'll wake up on oral core in a habitat 40 times the size of that hold, with veterinary care and a breeding program, and Gray. The juvenile is the most valuable animal in the group," Corin said gently. "A viable young female with a demonstrated," he glanced at his slate, "demonstrated behavioral plasticity. She'll be the center of the breeding line. She'll be very well cared for, better than anything a relief station can offer." "She's not a she," Cole said. "He's a he and his name is Gray, and you're not putting him in a crate." Corin's handlers had already begun. That was the thing Cyril would remember about the oral factor, that he was so reasonable and so certain that he had let his crew start rigging the sedation casters, while he was still explaining why the rigger's grief did not matter. And so he was mid-sentence when his lead handler put a sedation caster's sight on the scarred male, and the holding bay went all at once to the edge of a slaughter. The pack came up, 6 adults off the deck in a single surge, and Gray with them, and this was not the flat, patient promise the cub had saved for having. This was the full voice of a Frost Country pack that has just watched a soft-bodied stranger point a weapon at its scarred elder, and the sound of it drove the handlers back 3 steps and put 2 of them on the floor. Coron's certainty cracked down the middle. He had read a manifest that said 6 adults and 1 juvenile. He had not, Cyril saw, understood until this exact moment that the number on the manifest was a family, and that he had just walked a crating crew into the middle of it with sights up. "Casters down," Cyril said. Her voice cut the bay. "Every one of them down now, or I will not be able to stop what happens next, and neither will you." The handlers looked at Coron. Coron, pale, nodded, and the casters came down, and the pack's voice dropped from slaughter to warning, but it did not stop, and Gray had put itself between the whole crew and Cole, grown shoulders low, and would not be moved. "Factor Coron." Cyril stepped into the space between the pack and the crew, hands open, and put her slate up on the bay display for the second time in a month. "Before you sedate anything, you will want to read what this caste entered into its behavioral code 3 weeks ago. Protected classification, the warm vigil." Coron read it. Cyril watched the reasonable certainty drain out of him line by line. "This is a station behavioral code," he said at last. "It has no authority over syndicate property." "It has authority over what happens on this station," Cyril said. "And you are on this station, and you are about to interrupt a warm vigil in progress, which is now a protocol violation I am empowered to stop with force. But that is not the argument you should be worried about." She turned to Cole. "Rigger, tell the factor what happens to his valuable breeding animals if he crates them away from you." Cole had his hand on Gray's shoulder, steadying the grown cub, and his voice when it came was quiet and certain and entirely without heat, which was worse, Cyril had learned, than heat. "They stop eating," he said. "You saw it, you've got the infirmary records in that manifest, you must have. When they separated Gray from me for 4 days, he stopped eating and started declining, and your own behaviorists used the word. Now multiply that by 7, and put them in crates, and wake them up on oral core 40 light years from the only pack center they've got left." He looked at Coron steadily. "You'll have a habitat 40 times the size of that hold, and a breeding program and a veterinary team, and 7 of the last Frost Country Dreve in existence lying down and refusing to live. That's your conservation outcome. That's what the crate buys you." He shrugged, and the movement pulled at his healing chest, and he ignored it. "Their matriarch made me pack when she died. I didn't ask for it. But it's done, and it doesn't uncrate, and if you take them away from me, you're not moving property. You're killing the last of a species slowly, in a very well-funded habitat, and putting your name on it." The holding bay was quiet. The pack's warning had dropped to a low idle, 6 grown Dreve standing loose around a boy and watching a soft-bodied factor decide something. And Cyril thought that Coron could feel them watching, the way anyone could, the animal weight of being assessed by a thing that has already killed larger things than you. "Then what," Coron said finally, "do you propose I put in my report? That the syndicate abandoned 7 critically endangered animals to a relief corps rigger?" "No," said Cyril, because she had been thinking about this for 3 weeks since before the board, since the moment she understood that the pack would never leave the boy, and the boy would never let it. "You propose that the syndicate has found something it has never had, a viable Dreve pack with an intact social center and a keeper the animals trust absolutely, a keeper who can move among them, calm them, and be present at a birth without being killed for it. You propose that this is worth more to a breeding program than any crate, and you propose to hire the keeper." She looked at Cole. "The rigger goes where the pack goes. You want your breeding line factor. It comes with a human. That is the price, and it is not negotiable. And if you are the reasonable man you appear to be, you already know it is the best writ you are going to get off this station." A year later, on a cold world at the edge of the Oral Range, Warden Cyril Osk stepped off a supply lifter into knee-deep snow and was met by a man and 6 adult Dreve and a young male the size of a war beast. And not one of them, she was relieved to find, tried to kill her. She had not been sure they would remember her. A year is a long time, and she was one plated os among the many the pack had learned to tolerate on the day of the bay. But the scarred male came out of the tree line ahead of the others and stopped a few strides off and put its nose up and read her on the wind, and something in the set of it eased, and it turned and paced her into the keepers, lodged the way it had once paced a transfer, board up a gangway, escort and not threat. And Cyril understood that she had, somewhere in a ruined bay, been entered into a record deeper than the castes. Cole Merrick met her at the lodge door in a preserve coat gone gray with wear, and he looked, Cyril thought, entirely well, the crushed chest healed to a stiffness he carried without minding it, the softness of a station rigger weathered off him by a year of cold work. He was still young. He would always look young to her, the way all humans did. But he had the calm on him that the bay had shown her a glimpse of, worn in now, settled. The calm of a man who has found the exact work he was shaped for and stopped looking for any other. "Warden," he said, and there was real gladness in it, "you came a long way." "The caste sends me to audit the warm vigil sites," Cyril said. "There are 11 of them now across 4 preserves. Officers cite the classification a dozen times a year. A cub over a fallen handler, an adult that would not let the vets near a sick colony. Every one of them the officer stood down instead of reaching for the lance, and every one of them when they found out why, she stopped. You started something in that bay, rigger. My caste is still catching up to it." "Gray started it," Cole said. "I just held onto his leg." He whistled, low, 2 notes, and the young male came through the snow toward them, and Cyril had to work not to step back, because the thing that answered to Gray now was no cub at all. It stood taller at the shoulder than the scarred male. Its slate coat had darkened and thickened into a winter pelt, and the white blaze had come up its chest exactly where its mother's had been, and its amber eyes met Cyril's above her own and held them, reading her, and then it lowered its great head and pressed its nose once briefly to the top of Cole's shoulder, the matriarch's mark, the keeper's mark, given now by the son to the man, and Cole laid a hand along the huge jaw without looking, the way a man rests a hand on a familiar doorframe. "He's bigger than the alpha," Cyril said. "He's bigger than his mother was," Cole said it quietly. "The scarred one still leads the hunt. Gray lets him, but when something comes at the range," he shook his head, "it's Gray the others fall in behind. He's the one who remembers the bay. I think that's what makes an alpha in the end, not the biggest. The one who remembers what the pack's for." They walked the range that afternoon, the man and the warden and the pack loose around them, and Cole showed her what a year had built. The syndicate had been right about one thing. The habitat was vast, a whole cold valley given over to the Dreve, and the animals had spread into it and taken it and begun, slowly, to be a species again instead of the last survivors of a dieback. And Cole showed her the thing the syndicate had never had before him, the thing Cyril had promised Corin in the holding bay and had half feared was a lie. 2 of the adult females had denned that winter, and Cole had been present at both births, inside the den, hands-on, because the pack did not merely tolerate him at the whelping but seemed to want him there, the keeper their matriarch had marked, the one whose scent meant asterisk safe. There were 5 new cubs in the valley. The first frost country Dreve born in freedom in a generation, and every one of them had opened its eyes on a human face, and would carry the scent of that face as asterisk pack for the whole of its life. "That's your conservation outcome," Cole said, echoing the factor not unkindly. "Corin comes out twice a year to count them, and he still can't quite look at it straight. 7 animals I wasn't supposed to keep, and now there's 12, and there'll be more." He crouched in the snow as one of the winter cubs floundered out of a drift toward him, and he scooped it up one-handed and tucked it into his coat the way he must once have been unable to imagine doing, and the cub put its head under his jaw out of pure instinct, the oldest instinct its bloodline had, and Cole's face did something quiet. "They all do that," he said. Every one of them. Nobody teaches them. They just know. Somewhere in there they know what a human's throat is for. He looked up at Cyril. It's not for the airway, not really. I worked that out this year. Gray didn't hold my head all night because he'd calculated the geometry. He held my head because that's where a dreeve puts itself when it's decided you're the one it's not going to lose. The breathing was just what came of it. The breathing was luck. He stood, the cub in his coat. His mother didn't mark me because I was useful. She marked me because I put my glove up against the glass. That's the whole thing, Warden. That's the entire secret your caste spent 40 years missing. You don't earn a pack by being strong. You earn it by being the one who was kind to it through the wall on a bad night when nobody made you. The threat, when it came at dusk, and it was over before Cyril fully understood it had begun. There were poachers on the Oral Range that season. Cyril had read the advisories. A crew working the edge worlds for exactly the kind of critically reduced species that fetched a fortune from private collectors. The sort of men who would take a frost country dreeve pelt or a live cub and never think about the family they broke to get it. They came up the valley in the dark on skimmers with dampened signatures and net guns. And they came, of course, for the cubs, because the cubs were the prize, and they had done this many times before on many worlds, and had never once had a reason to be afraid. They had never worked a range with a keeper in it. Cyril did not see the poachers taken. She saw the aftermath. She saw Cole come in from the dark at a walk, unhurried, with Gray and the scarred male flanking him and the whole pack strung out behind in a formation she recognized from a gangway a year ago. And she saw, behind them, 4 soft-bodied strangers on their knees in the snow, disarmed, unmarked, herded, their skimmers dead, their net guns in pieces, and every one of them frozen with the specific stillness of a creature that has just learned, all the way down, that it is not the top of the food chain here and never was. The pack had not killed them. Cyril understood, looking at Cole's face, that this had been a decision, and whose. The pack had wanted to. The pack had taken them the way it had taken having, ringed and held and waiting, and it had waited for the keeper. And the keeper had said the same thing he had said in the bay, because he was the same man. "Call the range wardens," Cole said, mild, as he passed her toward the lodge with a cub still asleep in his coat. "Tell them I've got 4 for the judiciary, alive." He glanced back at the kneeling poachers, and at the pack ringed around them, patient, enormous, entirely willing. "They came for the cubs," he said, and for just a moment the calm went out of his voice and something older came into it, something that matched the flat, even note the pack had saved a year ago for a prefect. "I let them see the cubs, up close. I let them get a real good look at what they were reaching for." He turned back toward the warm light of the lodge. "Then I let the pack introduce itself. Nobody's hurt. But I don't think that crew's going to be able to sleep in the dark for a while, and I find I'm all right with that." That night the pack slept in the lodge, and Cyril, who had spent 40 years learning that apex fauna did not sleep indoors among soft bodies, sat by the long window and watched them do it and revised, one more time, a thing she had thought she knew. They came in out of the cold at full dark, all 7, and the 5 winter cubs, and they arranged themselves around the lodge's main room the way a family arranges itself in a room it owns, the scarred male by the door, where the draft was, because that was where a guard belonged. The females and their cubs banked against the warm stone of the hearth. And Gray, the young alpha, the war beast that had been a cub holding a scrap of sleeve, Gray came across the room to where Cole sat and lay down against him, and put its enormous head across the man's lap. And Cole rested a hand on the broad skull without breaking off what he was saying, and the whole room settled into the deep, slow breathing of a pack at rest. "I brought an aide," Cyril said, "a young officer. Danu, you remember Danu, he was in the bay. He wanted to see the site. He's in the lifter, he won't come in." She nodded at the sleeping pack. "He's been in the caste 6 years, and he cannot make his body walk into a room with 7 apex in it, even asleep, even here. It isn't cowardice. It's 40,000 years of instinct telling him the truth, that these are animals that can open him, and that being in a warm room with them is madness. She watched Gray's flank rise and fall against the boy. And he's right. That is the truth. What I cannot get him to understand, what I cannot quite get the caste to understand, and it is why they keep sending me out here, is that it is not the only truth. Both things are true at once. They can open him, and they have chosen not to. And the second truth is the one that matters, and the one my caste has no organ to feel. Os can't smell, Cole said. That's the whole of it, isn't it? You built a caste for containing predators, and you built it around an eye and a rule because those are the tools you had, and a predator's whole language is scent. He worked his fingers slow behind Gray's ear. You spent 40 years reading the danger and never once reading the intent, because the intent was written in the one sense your species doesn't have. So everything came up dangerous behavior. It had to. You were reading half the sentence. Yes, said Cyril, and did not enjoy how simply true it was. And a rigger who cannot smell any better than I can read it in 6 hours on a cold deck, because I wasn't reading his scent, Cole said. I was reading his hands. Same thing you did in the bay when everyone else saw a kill and you saw a sleeve that wasn't torn. You don't need a nose for that, Warden. You just need to be willing to be wrong about what you're looking at. That's the part that's hard, not the smelling, the being willing to be wrong. He looked over at her. That's why they keep sending you, isn't it? Because you were willing to be wrong in a room full of officers who weren't. And the caste needs someone who knows how to do that, and there aren't many of you. Cyril was quiet for a while. The fire moved. A cub dreamed against the hearth and ran in its sleep, small legs paddling, and one of the females lifted her head, checked it, and set her chin back down. The caste is rewriting its founding assumption, Cyril said at last. It is not going well. There are officers of 40 years, officers like me, who cannot accept that the first thing we ever learned to do, the containing, the lance, was built on reading half a sentence. It feels to them like being told the ground is water. Some of them would rather keep the old classification and go on being certain than take the new one and be humble. She turned from the window. That is the real reason I came, rigger, not the audit. The caste high council has asked whether a human keeper, whether you would come and stand in front of the assembled caste, the way you stood in front of the tribunal, and teach them to read the other half. To be, for my whole species, the thing you were for me in the bay, the one who was willing to be wrong first so the rest could follow. She spread her plaited hands. I told them you would say no. You have a valley and a pack and 5 cubs and everything you were shaped for. Why would you cross the reach to lecture a caste of frightened old officers on a thing they should have learned themselves? Cole looked down at the great gray head across his lap. Gray's amber eyes had opened at some point and were watching the fire, half-lidded, unhurried. The young alpha did not lift its head, but one huge paw shifted, slow, and came to rest across the man's knee, the way it had rested a paw against a wall of frustrated glass on a night the world fell in, and Cole put his hand over it. His mother crossed 20 meters of a collapsing hold to stand over a stranger she'd seen be kind through a wall, Cole said quietly, because she decided that was worth dying for, that a thing that would be gentle to her child through the glass on a bad night was a thing worth handing her whole line to. He was quiet a moment. I've spent a year trying to be worth that. It's the only thing I care about being worth. He looked up at Cyril and the calm on him had gone very steady. So yes, I'll come. Not because your caste deserves it. Because she'd have gone, if it had been the other way around, if some frightened caste across the reach was reaching for the lance every time they misread a pack, she'd have crossed a collapsing hold to stand over them and make them look again. That's what she marked me for, I think. Not just to keep her cubs, to be the one who goes and stands over the ones who don't understand yet and makes them look again. He rubbed the huge paw under his hand. Tell your council I'll come. And tell your young officer in the lifter to come inside. The pack won't touch him. You cannot promise that, Cyril said. I can actually, Cole almost smiled. They'll read him. They'll smell that he's afraid, and they'll smell that he's not here to hurt anyone, and they'll file him under the warden's harmless and go back to sleep. That's all the pack's judgment ever was, warden. reading who you are off the wind and deciding whether you're a threat. They've never once been wrong about it. He nodded at the door. Go get your officer. Let him learn the thing your whole caste needs to learn, the only way it can actually be learned. Standing in a warm room full of the animals he's afraid of, finding out he's still breathing. Junior enforcement Danu stood in the lodge doorway for a long time before he could make himself cross it, and every Dreve in the room woke up to watch him do it, and Cyril let it happen because it was the only lesson that had ever worked. He came in the way a man walks onto ice he does not trust. The scarred male by the door lifted its head and read him and set its chin back down. One of the females tracked him to the hearth and passed it. Gray did not move at all, only opened its amber eyes and let the young officer feel the weight of being looked at by the thing he most feared, and Danu made it to the far wall and put his back against it and stood there breathing hard, alive, unhurt, in a warm room full of apex predators, and Cyril watched the exact moment the old truth and the new truth sat down together in him for the first time. They can open me. They have chosen not to. Both at once. His whole body shook with it, and then slowly stopped shaking. There, Cole said, mild, not unkind. That's the whole course. You can tell the council you graduated. Danu did not answer. He was not ready to make words. But he slid down the wall and sat on the floor of a room full of predators, which was a thing no os of the containment caste had done in the history of the caste and lived to speak of. And he stayed. And after a while his breathing came down, and one of the winter cubs, the dreamer, the small one that ran in its sleep, got up from the hearth and crossed the room on unsteady legs and sniffed at the young officer's plated foot, and then climbed into the warm angle of his crossed leg and went back to sleep. And Danu looked down at it as though someone had set a live coal in his lap that had turned out, against everything he knew, to be warm. It doesn't, Danu started and stopped and tried again. It isn't afraid of me. No, said Cole. It's a day past its eyes opening and it's never been taught to be. It read you off the air and filed you under the warden's harmless and now you're furniture. That's the highest rank the pack gives, by the way, furniture. It means they've decided they don't have to watch you. He almost smiled. Took Gray about 6 hours to file me under something better than furniture. Took your whole caste 6 weeks. This one did it in 6 breaths because nobody's ruined it yet. He looked at the cub asleep on the officer's leg. That's the animal your order would have put a lance in, on the deck, if the warden hadn't stood in the way. Sit with that a while. It's the only way it ever goes in. Near dawn the dreamer nearly died, and that was the lesson none of them had planned. It went out through the cub flap in the lodge door in the gray before light, the way the small ones did, and it went too far, out across the frozen tarn below the lodge where the snow had crusted thin over black ice, and the crust broke, and by the time its thin high cry reached the lodge the cub was in the water to its neck, and the ice was cracking wider around it, and its mother was already screaming at the tarn's edge, and could not go out onto the breaking ice without finishing it. Cyril came out into the cold to a scene arranged like a trap, a drowning cub, a frantic pack ringed at the shore, and half a ton of grown Dreve at every point where a rescuer would need to stand, none of them able to cross the rotten ice their own weight would shatter. Gray, hold them. Cole was already moving, out of the lodge with a coil of range line, and the young alpha threw itself across the shore and turned the panicking mother back with its shoulder, held the whole pack off the ice by main force, because the one thing that would kill the cub for certain was 6 adult Dreve rushing the crust. Danu, Cole shouted, uncoiling the line as he ran. You're lighter than me on your feet and I need 2 anchors. Get down, spread your weight, take the line. Warden, the other end to the doorpost. And junior enforcement Danu, who could not that evening make himself walk into a warm room, ran out onto the frozen edge of a tarn at dawn to save a predator's child, because there was no time left in him to be afraid. He went flat on the ice the way Cole shouted at him to, spread across the crust, and he took the line, and Cole went out past him on his belly across ice that boomed and settled under him, out to the black hole where a slate-gray cub was going under for the 3rd time, and he got a hand into the scruff. The same grip a dying matriarch had used to set this bloodline in his arms a year ago, and he hauled, and Danu hauled the line, and Cyril hauled from the post. And the ice held long enough and no longer, and they dragged a soaked and shaking cub back across the crust to the shore, and into the reach of its mother's frantic tongue. The pack did not maul the two os who had been on the ice with their keeper. The pack swarmed them. Cyril watched 6 adult Dreve, and a young alpha close over Cole and Danu, both in a crush of relief, noses and shoulders, and the deep chest rumble of a pack that has not, after all, lost one of its own, and she watched Danu vanish into the middle of it, a containment officer buried under the animals he had feared his whole life, and she heard him laugh, a raw, astonished, broken sound, the sound of a man to whom something has just been done that his caste had no word for and would need one. Cole came up out of the pile soaked and grinning, the rescued cub already climbing his chest to jam its head under his jaw, and he looked at Cyril over the gray heads, and he did not say anything because he did not have to. The lesson had taught itself, the only way it could. Danu had not learned that the pack was safe. He had learned the truer thing, the whole sentence, that the pack was deadly, and that he had stood in the deadly thing's own water at dawn and hauled its child out of the dark, and that the deadly thing had answered him not with teeth, but with a relief so total it knocked him flat, and that both of those were the same animal, and always had been, and that the only creatures in the galaxy who had ever managed to hold both truths at once without going mad were the ones who had bothered first to be kind. Cole Merrick addressed the assembled containment caste of Karsus Reach in the season of the long dark, and he brought Grey with him, and Cyril stood at the side of the great hall and watched her whole species meet, at last, the thing it had spent 40,000 years learning to kill. They had built for it the way the Aussie built for everything, a raised floor, a containment field they did not arm, a protocol for every contingency, 300 officers ranked in the tiers of the hall with the old certainty on their plated faces, the certainty of a caste that had come, quietly and against the High Council's wishes, to prove the rigor wrong. Cyril had counted on that. So had Cole. It was the whole reason he had crossed the Reach, not to teach the officers who already believed, but to stand in front of the ones who did not, the 40-year men, the readers of half a sentence, and let them look. He walked out onto the raised floor in his worn preserve coat, an ordinary young man with capable hands, and beside him walked a war beast the size of a docking sled, slate-gray with a white blaze up its chest and amber eyes that swept the 300 ranked officers with a slow, unhurried attention, and Cyril felt the hall's certainty falter in a single indrawn breath. She had forgotten, out on the cold valley where Grey was simply Grey, what the animal looked like to eyes seeing it fresh. It looked like the end of the food chain. It looked like every reason the containment caste existed, and it walked at a rigger's knee across a hall full of its natural enemies with the ease of a thing that has decided, once and for all, where it belongs. "My name is Cole Merrick," he said, and the translators carried it to 300 officers, flat and plain. "A year and a half ago your caste came into a wrecked docking bay and found this animal standing over my body, and it read the danger correctly and the intent not at all, and it called what it saw dangerous behavior, and it gave the order to put us both down. He let it sit. It was right about the danger. I want to start there because I know what you're all telling yourselves. He's going to say the beast is gentle. He's going to say we were wrong to be afraid." He shook his head. "You weren't. This animal could clear this hall in a minute, and there is not a field in this room that would stop it, and every one of you knows it. The danger is real. I'm not here to tell you it isn't." 300 officers held very still. "I'm here to tell you that dangerous was the wrong first word," Cole said. "Not the wrong word, the wrong first word. Because the moment you led with it, you stopped looking, and everything after came out wrong. You saw a beast on a body and reached for the lance. And if a warden of 40 years hadn't stood in the way, you'd have collapsed 200 kilos of animal onto a crushed man's chest and finished the one thing that was keeping him alive. And you'd have written it up as a clean containment, and you'd never once have known you did it. He put a hand on Gray's shoulder, and the young alpha turned its great head and pressed its nose briefly to the top of the man's head, the matriarch's mark, in front of the whole assembled caste, and Cyril heard 300 officers stop breathing at once. This animal held my head all night in the one position that kept my heart from drowning. It read an injury your medics needed a scanner to find, and it built the treatment out of its own body, and it defended that treatment against an armed room, because a scent hunter smelled a truth a scent-blind caste couldn't, that I was hurt, that I was pack, and that the men who wanted to move me were going to kill me doing it. His hand moved slow on the gray shoulder. You called that dangerous behavior. It was the most competent piece of triage anyone performed in that bay, and it was performed by a 6-month-old animal you'd have shot for doing it. He looked up at the tiers slow, taking them in rank by rank. You can't smell, Cole said gently, and it landed in the great hall like a struck bell. That's not an insult, it's the whole thing. You built a caste to contain predators, and you built it around an eye and a rule, because a nose was the one tool your species was never issued. And a predator's entire language, its fear, its grief, its love, its judgment of who's a threat and who's kin, is written in scent. So for 40,000 years you've read the danger which you can see, and never the intent which you can't smell, and you filed the whole species under one word and reached for one tool, and you were reading half the sentence and calling it the book. He spread his hands. I can't smell either. Neither can your warden ask. And the two of us read the other half in one bad night, not because we had a better nose, but because when the evidence of the eye said kill and something underneath said look again, we were willing to be wrong about what we were looking at. That's all it takes. That's the entire skill, not the nose, the willingness. Sarah watched the 40-year men. She watched the certainty go out of the ranked plated faces, tier by tier, not all at once and not from every one of them, but from enough officers old enough to have signed a great many termination orders, enough of them looking at a war beast that had just marked a human's head with tenderness in front of 300 witnesses, and doing the hardest arithmetic the caste had ever asked of them. The arithmetic of how many times, across 40 years, the animal on the far end of their lance had been conducting a warm vigil that no one had a word for yet, and had died for it, called dangerous. Strike the first assumption, Cole said. That's all I came to ask. Not to stop containing what's actually dangerous. You'll always need to, and I'll be the first to call you when a pack goes wrong. Strike the first assumption. When you walk into a room and an apex won't let you near a body, don't lead with the lance. Lead with the question. Ask why it chose to keep this one. Because it has already made a judgment every time that your caste is only now learning how to read, and 9 times out of 10, when you finally read it, you're going to find the beast was the most decent thing in the room. He put his hand back on Gray's shoulder. You already wrote the word for it, the warm vigil. A warden of your own caste put it in the code. All I'm asking is that you believe her. He looked for a moment, straight at the tier where the 40-year men sat. She was right in the bay when the rest of you were reaching for the lance. She's right in the code now. Believe her. And the next time one of you walks into a wrecked bay and finds a monster standing over a dying kid, refusing to let anyone close look again before you fire, that's the whole ask. Just look again. The containment caste of Karsus Reach struck its founding assumption that season. It did not do it gracefully, and it did not do it all at once, and there were 40-year men who retired rather than signed the amendment. But the amendment carried, and the first line of the caste's behavioral code, the line that had opened every officer's training for as long as the caste had existed, was changed, from an instruction about what apex fauna could do to a question about what it was doing. And every recruit who came up through the caste hall after that read, on the first day, the case that had changed it. A wrecked bay, a crushed rigger, a cub that would not move, and a warden who was willing to be wrong. Sarah walked Cole and Gray back to the docks when it was done. The concourse cleared before them the way it had cleared 1.5 years ago on a gangway, personnel pressing to the bulkheads, but the shock on the faces had changed. It had something else in it now, under the fear, and Cyril did not have a word for that either, and found she did not need one. "Will it hold?" Cole asked her at the lock. Gray stood at his knee, reading the cold dock air patient. "Some of it," Cyril said. "Not all. My caste is old and it is proud and it does not enjoy being told it read half a sentence for 40,000 years. But the word is in the code now, and the case is in the hall, and the recruits will grow up on it. It will hold in the recruits." She looked at the young man and the war beast, the ordinary human and the last of a saved species, standing together at the mouth of a ship that would carry them back to a cold valley full of cubs born free. "You did a thing here, Rigger, that my whole caste in 40,000 years could not do for itself. You made us look again." Cole put his hand on the Gray's shoulder, and Gray leaned into it. Half a ton of frost country apex, resting its weight against a man it had chosen on a bad night through a wall of glass. And the young man looked at the warden and almost smiled. "I didn't make you look again," he said. "I never could have. You'd have shot us both in the bay and written it up clean and been sure you were right and nobody would ever have known different." He rubbed the huge jaw, slow, and the amber eyes half closed. "His mother made you look again. She crossed a collapsing hold to put her child in the arms of the one person in that bay who'd been kind to it through the glass. And then she stood in the wreck and died making sure the falling landed on her and not on us. Everything after that, the warden who wouldn't step back, the code, the caste striking its first assumption, all of it is just what came of one dying animal deciding a stranger who'd been gentle to her cub through a wall was worth handing her whole line to." He stepped back into the lock and Gray came with him, and he looked out at Cyril one last time across the cold dock, calm, ordinary, 23 years old and unafraid, with the last of the frost country apex leaning warm against his side. "You want to know what humanity is, Warden? That's it. We're the ones who put a glove up against the glass on a bad night when nobody made us, and then we spend the rest of our lives trying to be worth what the other side of the glass decided to give us for it." The lock began to close. "Tell your recruits that part too. Tell them the beast was never the dangerous thing in that bay. The dangerous thing was a caste that stopped looking. Don't ever stop looking again." The lock sealed. The ship took them home to the cold valley and the cubs born free, and Warden Cyril Osk stood a long time on the empty dock in the season of the long dark, and thought about a scrap of sleeve held unbroken in jaws that could crack a strut, and understood, finally and all the way down, that in 40 years of calling things dangerous she had never once, until a rigger taught her, understood what the word was for.